I think we are ready to call to order the 131st meeting of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission, held once again at the Boston Convention and Exhibition Center, August 7th at 10:30. We will go straight to item 2 on the agenda, the approval of minutes.
The minutes of the July 24th meeting are in the book, and I move that they be accepted as they appear therein with leave to correct mechanical and typographical errors.
Second?
Second.
The only thing I noticed was that in the minutes from July 24, it says that the July 15 minutes were not approved, and they were going to be coming forward at the next meeting, which I think is this one.
Right, and I'm not as certain, I was going to inquire about that after this meeting, but that's what we said last time.
Right. So
This accurately records what we said last time.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. We did say we would bring them back at this meeting. I wanted to confer with Commissioner Zuniga to determine what best changes need to be made, and I understand that now, so we'll bring them forward at the next meeting with the appropriate changes.
Okay, great. Any other discussion about the minutes?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. Item 3, Administration, Executive Director Day.
Good morning, Chairman Crosby.
Morning.
Commission.
Good morning.
I just have a short general update, administrative-wise. Our gaming licensing staff visited Plain Ridge Race Course yesterday to meet horse racing regulatory staff and better understand racing functions and process. I thought it was a very productive meeting. We had an active discussion with all parties, and I think it'll be helpful as we continue to transition. In addition, our licensing staff and contract staff are also making progress testing our new licensing system. And actually, in about 2 weeks, we'll probably move into a new phase of user testing, where individuals outside the system will being asked to help us out with checking it in our system and seeing if it will work for them. So we look forward to that starting. It's a sign of progress that we're continuing to move ahead. We are also in the final selection process for five positions, and we anticipate getting those selections done hopefully by the end of the month. Our CIO is also busily searching out and making progress with the technical expertise we need in the gambling lab management area. With the end of the formal legislative session, we've been working to identify anything that comes from that session, and we'll most likely have a more detailed report for the Commission in the end of the month, on August 21st. And we also have our lease expires on December 31st, and we have identified office space that we move into by the end of the year. With that, if you have any other questions, I'd try to answer them, and if not, I'll move on real quickly to the next topic.
Anybody?
No questions.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next on your agenda is item B under the administration. Once again, we have Penn National Gaming back to visit with us. Today, the idea is to be able to take a look at how the floor plan development is coming, and to share information with the Commission for discussion and questions you might have. We have been able to agree with Penn regarding the Commission space.
We've got to get rid of that hum.
Yeah. Thank you.
Is there, does he need to be closer to the mic or something?
Yeah, closer to the mic. We'll be happy to do that. So I'll try this again. Penn is here again to visit with us, and the item for discussion today is the floor plan layout. We've made a lot of progress in discussions with Penn regarding the Commission office space that will house the Massachusetts State Police Unit that will be working with us, our gaming agents and auditors, as well as a separate area that will house horse racing staff, and our licensing staff. We're moving forward with a concept that would actually have those co-locate, make the office location a little more convenient, and move it out of the middle of the administrative unit for Penn. So today we've asked Jennifer Pink, Jack Rowan, and Lance George are here to update us on the progress with their floor plan. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Morning.
Today, as Director Day said, we're going to go over the floor plan, or actually Lance George will go over the floor plan. I just like to spend a couple minutes talking to you about the process that we've been through. I would say within a few weeks after the award of the license, we commenced my staff meeting with Director Dernberger, Director Wells, Director Costa, and Director Day to ascertain what were the space needs. We knew Penn was getting going quickly, and we wanted to have a sense of their needs on the floor or in the building. And so we provided Penn with the programmatic needs, number of offices, number of cubicles, whether a kitchen was needed, a kitchen was not needed, whether a surveillance room was needed, and how many square feet approximately would be desired. And we transmitted that to Penn. We met with them a couple times to look over their current floor plans. And in the ensuing months since then, or 6 to 8 weeks since then, there have been numerous meetings with the Gaming Commission staff and with Penn to arrive at the location of the space that the Gaming Commission needs. And we've also been monitoring the development of the floor plan so that we could see that there were accommodations. Also, I forgot Mark Vanderlinden for responsible gaming. And we're looking for the details that we know inevitably need to be checked off, such as space for lottery agents or lottery sales. And so I'm happy to report today that Penn is here today with a floor plan that has the layout of those areas. Some may change. And we have gotten, I believe, the input and the consensus from the Gaming Commission staff who will be there or will be visiting there on a regular basis. What this presentation today does not include, because they're not yet finalized, are some of the actual details. You know, we have a room. Does that room have a glass light in the door? To be determined. What is the locking systems? What is surveillance? What is security? There's space for data, for MGC data. You'll see little purple areas. What does that room actually look like? How is it secure from other parts of that same room? Those are yet to be worked out, but what we now have is an arrangement of space and square footage that will meet the programmatic needs of the Gaming Commission staff assigned, and the Mass State Police, and the judges for racing, et cetera. And other accommodations that will need to be made on the gaming floor. So what I'd like to do is turn it over to Lance George, who I know you know, and he's going to walk you through what they are working on building.
Sure. I think thank you. That's a good preamble into this. Good morning.
Morning.
Several
Morning.
familiar faces with me again. We've got Jack Brown, Vice President of Project Development. Steve O'Toole, another coworker. He is the General Manager of Racing at Plainridge. And then we also have one new face with us. It is Darlene Whitmore from JCGA Architecture. Nobody knows this project more than she does. So if you're able to stump us, I believe she'll be able to come through for us.
So are they the overall architects for the plan?
They are.
And have been back from the Our Way day?
That's correct.
Days. Yeah.
Yep. Before we get to our submission, just a few general comments. As I begin to put my notes together, I realized how much information we've provided. With that in mind, our comments will focus on the general arrangement of space, which is consistent with what Jennifer just mentioned. We'll call out space allocated for responsible gaming, state police, racing and licensing, lottery, and a couple of others. Some elements haven't been finalized, slot layout, finishes, back of house details. As we've done throughout the process, we'll continue to work with the commission staff to ensure that all critical elements end up in compliance. It's clear that significant progress is being made, and this progress has occurred due to a lot of hard work and notably a lot of cooperation amongst all the parties involved. I want to thank everyone. So today I get to ride those coattails and update you on the great work that has been completed by several groups. Hats off to Jack, Mike McGrew, the internal Penn construction team, Jennifer Pink and her staff, JCJ Architecture, Turner Construction, Tilton and Associates, Rick Day and the MGC staff, Beth Brejnahan at the Lottery Commission, Joe Fernandez in the town of Plainville, Detective Lieutenant Brian Connors and Sergeant Timothy Babin, to name a few. I make those comments, and it's quite possible that I may have missed somebody, so I want to apologize in advance if I have. With that, I'd like to turn to the documents that have been submitted. We'll be providing specific comments on a few of the pages with others inserted for reference. With that being said, by all means, stop us and ask any questions at any time. First page on the submission is the site plan. Hopefully this page allows everyone to orient themselves. You can see Washington Street, the entrance, and then the general layout of the facility, along with parking and the track. A lot going on here. You've certainly seen a document like this or one very similar before. I'd like to draw your attention to just a few items. Up at the top, off of the entrance, we have reactivated an existing haul road. Significant benefit here on the racing side. The horsemen will be able to pull in, take an immediate left. This will allow them to avoid the parking lot. We've added their own private parking over in that area as well. As far as where the security will go, a gate, a man shack, that is being discussed, but it certainly will be somewhere in that area depending on race day. The other item to note is the racing and licensing building. Perfect. So this building had always been contemplated. However, the last several weeks, and with the assistance of Rick and his team, we've been able to further define what functions will occur out of this location. The notable change that we just heard actually is that licensing will now be handled here. So a lot of discussion as to where they would fit in. Rick came up with this suggestion. David Acosta loves the idea. I think collectively there's a lot of agreement that this works for everybody. Beyond this, the site plan remains has been presented in the past. Again, certainly happy to answer any questions you might have. Might be more effective to walk through the slides and then come back and answer questions at the end. The next page should be the first floor of the casino, and it is. Significant detail here, both front of house and back of house space. This page has largely been included for reference. The hope and intent was not to bore you walking through each space or from office to office, rather to illustrate where we are in the process and just how much work has been completed. One area that I will call out here is the live racing space, which would be the purple area. This space will see a significant refresh to ensure there is a seamless transition from the casino space into the racing space. In addition to ensuring the space is fully integrated, improved light fixtures, plumbing, and HVAC will help us achieve the LEED Gold status for the project. There's a legend that has been provided should assist as you make your way through this document. I do want to stop here. One other item that has come up is the location of the restaurants. So, yes and yes. So, which one? All right,
Yeah.
Here you go. This is what internally we're referring to as the Oyster Bar. And then the one below it is the Flutie Sports Pub. Candidly, we understand there's a bit of confusion. And we know originally the intent, based on some documents, show that Flutie's would be an under 21 establishment. The establishment that will be under 21 is at the top, the Oyster Bar. The reason, it's fairly simple. That location for racing and then into that area is for under 21 guests. Once you get into the Flutie's area and off of the casino floor, obviously that is not designed or never was intended to be under 21. We've been working with Jennifer on this issue. She brought it to our attention. You know, if there's a feeling that this rises to the level of a variance, we're certainly happy to work through that issue, but certainly we're aware of the confusion, and we've been working through it with Jennifer.
I asked, the only thing I thought about was if this had been a major part of the pitch, that the Flutie was going to be an attraction that would be accessible to everybody without getting into the gaming floor, if that had been one of the major sales pitches, then I think was something we at least would want to think about. But I asked the staff to go back and look through all the materials, and although there is some record of talking about it being accessible, it was not a big deal. So from my standpoint, it's not, you know, this is well within your discretion as far as I'm concerned. What's the access to the Oyster Bar?
Access?
From the outside?
Correct. So you can see, there you go. Entrance points. So you see the live racing area where it currently exists. They'll be able to enter in that location. So they'll either be able to enter direct or walk through or from the racing location. And then there'll be a posted security guard just past the entrance.
There's no direct access to either of the restaurants from the outside.
No, there is, to the Oyster Bar.
Right.
Is that, but I thought that's where you come into a quarter. Okay, yeah, I get you. Okay. I'm certainly fine with that. Everybody else is too.
Yeah, no problem, no issue here. Actually makes a lot of sense.
Good. Thank you. As an aside, specific to this area, if there's one area that will continue to evolve right up until opening day, it would be the casino floor. Right now, we're in the process of revisiting, that's the area in yellow, I guess light yellow, revisiting that for the addition of electronic table games. We'll continue to tweak based on sign packages, floor mix, on and on. So, though in large part, many items are set in stone, certainly the layout of the casino floor will evolve and continue to evolve right up until the very end.
Lance and Jennifer, can you just scroll down a little bit more? So what is, and maybe this is an operational issue that you resolve at a later time, but from the under 21 to the 21, it's that orange sort of circle. It's like a corridor, right? Will there be like a guard, or is that, a...
Yeah.
Can
Yeah.
you just expound a little bit?
Of course.
Is that the only point from the under to the casino floor?
Right, so yes, to answer the first question, 24/7, there'll absolutely be a security guard stationed there to
Right.
ensure there's nobody who enters who is under 21. The other location would be porte cochere area, which is gold right here. We would have security guards stationed there. That is one entrance. So typically, we will see about 15 to 20% of our patrons arrive through that area. And the other location, there you go, there'll be another security guard stationed there. That would be off of the elevator.
From
To the parking garage,
Right, yes, from the
which
parking
is
garage.
over here.
Okay.
Great.
Next page should be the upper floors. It should be the clubhouse. Where do we go? Here we go, yeah.
There we go.
Yep. This space, so this is the second level. This is largely a mix of office space, simulcast theater, and meeting space. The meeting space, the area highlighted in purple, the dark purple, as you may or may not be able to see, this room will divide into two separate meeting areas. So total occupancy for the entire space, standing I believe is 500, seated I believe is around 250. This will allow some flexibility around meeting space specifically, certainly some banqueting opportunities there and some special event opportunities as well. The other side, this is the simulcast theater, and you'll note that some VIP rooms have been added as well, and that color I believe is, I guess lilac. We'll go with lilac. Okay.
But there's also simulcast in the clubhouse, right? So
Down below a level?
Down below, yeah.
Correct. Also up here, you will note some office space set aside for surveillance. Operationally,
Oh, that's over here,
yeah,
right?
down bottom.
Right.
This works well. Typically what you're going to see is the surveillance folks separated from the general population. So in this case, it works out very well for us that we're able to accommodate them in this location. Next slide. Okay. So a lot to talk about here, and there's a lot of good stories here. Jennifer alluded to it earlier. I think Rick may have touched on it, but a lot of work going into identifying and settling on locations for different agencies. We've got regulatory, so we've got responsible gaming, we've got state police, we've got licensing. We'll kind of walk through that. We'll start with the legend as our guide. Responsible gaming, that area, there you go, it's in yellow. So we've been working with Mark Vanderlinden, and in those conversations, the goal was to identify a very busy, high-traffic area. And so as I just mentioned, we'll see about 80-ish% of our folks entering right through this area. So we certainly can check that box. The other request from Mark was to ensure that it is an inviting space. And so what we've done is gone back. Originally, it was designed to be office space, potentially for a host. So we've gone back and removed the wall so that folks can just walk in. There is no door. It'll be a much more inviting space. The space will be divided into two. The front half will provide information, literature. The back half of that space will be more of a private area. and that will be manned. I think that those conversations have yet to be had as far as specific hours, but that is the general concept.
And that's enough space, obviously, that's,
He's delighted with the amount of space.
Great.
He has ample space there, no doubt about it. It's a great space for him.
great.
Next, working through the legend, we've got the state slot data facilities. Those are identified in purple. You know, not a lot to report here other than we have allocated space for that. That space, some of that will depend on the decisions that you guys will be making as it relates to a central monitoring system. So it's there, if that's where we end up. If not, we will commandeer that space and figure out something to do with it, I'm sure. Moving down the list, we've got lottery. You'll see lottery locations, and then underneath it will further define whether that is retail, PAT, or Keno. And I believe PAT stands for Personal
Player-
Access Terminal.
Yes, something like that.
Okay.
Player activated terminal.
Player activated terminal? Thank you.
Not the football team, but
That's right. Good conversations with Beth, very easy to work with. She has this document. We connected on Monday. She gave me the green light for these locations. No issues on their end, so we've been able to check that box as well. The one retail location for the lottery will be located actually in our retail shop. Some of the locations remain where they are on the racing side of things. The only other, I guess, two other items to call out here, state offices. Those are in brick, red, burnt orange. You can see them at the bottom. You'll see two locations, actually. You'll see the bottom and then up closer to the gaming floor. And so if there is a need for these folks to be closer to the gaming floor, that option exists for them. Otherwise, they will be located down at the bottom with parking, reserved parking for them. They will also have their own private entrance in and out as well. They can walk through the facility, but they will have a dedicated entrance of their own to walk in and out. This also locates them close to both the man trap and the armored car bay, should there be any issues there. So that was not initially in the man trap. Working with Bruce Band, we've gone back and edited that for him, and so we're in good shape there in the
Did
proximity
you
of
say
these
the
offices.
man trap?
Man trap.
What's a man trap?
Safety feature allows somebody to enter, and until that door is closed, somebody else cannot enter.
Do you guys know what
That's
a man
right in
trap
here.
is?
yes, we've been to one.
We've been to one,
All
yeah.
right, sorry. Pretend I didn't ask that.
Strike that from the record.
I don't know the
Yeah,
Christmas
strike that
tree.
from the record.
Fair enough. The other item, just as an aside here, at the top is, there you go, the lead information. As part of our application, we committed to provide information based on our gold status of energy savings. That will be displayed on a monitor that is located there. So as soon as you walk in, a prominent area for that information as well.
Great.
Lastly, racing operation and regulatory. So we've touched on this a few times now, but good story here. A lot of people scratching their heads, certainly on our side, as to how to accommodate all the needs for space. This really frees up some much-needed space in the building, and it actually makes sense on the licensing and racing side. On the left is, site plan information, an awful lot of information. I had to ask questions on the buffer zone, no disturb zone, but in short, that will help orient where the building is located. And then to the right is the current layout or the floor plan. Plenty of space. I think working on the timing, but that will certainly be coming at plenty of time to handle and accommodate all of the licensing process. Is that it?
I think that's it.
That's all?
That's all. Let's hold on a second. I think,
Oh, okay, I thought you said, any other?
Yeah, why don't you ask about that?
What do you got?
I was just asking about the clean restroom. We wanted to make note of that?
Make sure they all are.
You're talking about this location specifically?
I am, sir.
I'll defer to Steve. It's not just because it's clean.
Okay.
That's an area set aside for drug testing, so clean, I think, means.
I see.
Oh,
Okay.
it's good to know.
Sterile environment.
You get the clean bathroom, you get the dirty bathroom.
Yeah. Sterile for the drug testing. I see.
Just in the diagram to the left, it mentions a gate. Is that something that's existing or something that's, if somebody's coming in to go to the licensing services, they would have to pass through a gate?
So I do want Steve to weigh in, but the licensing services, they will not have to pass through a gate. The gate is for the racing side of things.
Right.
Existing right now is is that gate, this is overlaid over an existing site plan.
Oh, this gate here.
Right.
But that's old,
That
yes.
gate will be gone, and then there's another gate you'll see that is a little bit further back on the parking lot, right there, just down a little bit. Both of those gates will actually be gone. That gate that she's pointing to now, that one will be moved back, and that'll actually be a crash gate for emergency only. The access, that's the access to the backside into the paddock area now. That's, as you saw earlier when Lance was explaining the site plan, now the horse traffic is not going by the Port Cashier, it's going the back route, which is customary in most tracks. It's separate from the gaming floor. So that'll be a crash gate for emergency purposes only, and there'll be a guard shack there for a man gate to allow horsemen to go over to the licensing area to get licensed.
Thank you.
Just out of curiosity, Steve, what's happened to racing handle this year?
Well, Lance has mentioned a couple of good stories, and it's actually a very good story this year. Our live on-track handle is up about 10%. And it's amazing to me because we are really imposing on our
Right.
customers, and customers that would, I'm going to use the term bellyache over the smallest things now. I'm trying to prompt them to give me some type of bellyaches, and they will not. I say, I'm sorry for the inconvenience, and they'll say, oh, this is great, we love it, and the handle actually shows it. Our simulcast handle has leveled off to, actually, we've been up the last month 5%, and we're actually comparing apples to apples now because of the withholding. So we're now in the post period of the withholding, which happened around the end of May.
Right.
Before that, it showed we were down about 12 to 15% in that area. But now that we're actually comparing apples to apples, we've been up the last month about 5%, which I'm really thrilled about.
Are there more people coming, or are people betting more? What do you ascribe it to?
I see a lot of new faces.
More
I
faces.
see a lot of faces, maybe curiosity to take a look at the project, and it's a very aggressive project, and it's the site is very busy, and I think that they like coming down and seeing it.
Great. Great. Okay, anything else? That item?
I have nothing further.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Thanks a lot, folks.
Thank you.
Next up is agenda item 4, the Ombudsman Report. Mr. Ziemba.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning, sir.
Included in your packet is a more detailed estimate of the schedule for Region C. This schedule shows the December 1st deadline for RFA1 background applications and the March 27, 2015 RFA2 application deadline that the Commission decided a short time ago. The chart shows more detail regarding the other licensing steps that are necessary, such as the timelines for any disputes between applicants and surrounding communities. In the event that such a dispute is not resolved earlier than arbitration, the eventual award of a Region C license could take until August 2015, as we previously identified. We'll continue to explore methods of avoiding or resolving quickly such disputes in order to shorten or avoid any delay. As for next steps, shortly after the intense Region A review period over the next 5+ weeks, we'll reach out to potential candidates to check on their progress with developing their plans. Specifically, we'll check to make sure that materials are being collected to enable the IEB to complete its reviews on time. As a reminder, the IEB has only approximately 4 months to complete its reviews, running from the RFA 1 date to the RFA 2 date. To the degree that applicants can get in materials ahead of the RFA 1 deadline, that would certainly be helpful. As a related update, we recently had discussions with representatives from a number of agencies regarding our schedule on Region C, our recent decision on the MGM and Region A, and our award to Penn National on the slots license. We thanked agencies for all the work that has been done to date and stated that we look forward to working with them in the future. Overall, I think agencies understand our timelines and our focus on post-licensing to develop these facilities as soon as we can.
These are our state agencies.
State agencies, yeah. They also understand that we respect their individual missions and certainly their individual statutory responsibilities. As we move forward with Region C, we'll continue to work to determine how best to streamline both our licensing process and the post-licensing process. And that's my report.
Any questions, thoughts? Are there any other information about nibbles on Region C? Any more interested parties or communities? Or
I don't think I have any public reports, or actually many private reports. So,
all right.
Just a big cone of silence there.
John, I'm just looking here at the schedule, and I'm just eyeballing it a little bit, but it's around January 10th that we are tentatively predicting that a host community agreement would be executed. Is that correct? And it's, of course, it can move because there's no restriction before this.
right. The only restriction is obviously that there has to be 60 to 90 days after the host community agreement before our application deadline, because they have to have the referendum before the RFA2 application is submitted.
Right. So the line that starts here could really happen any time.
Correct.
Before December 1st or thereabouts.
That's
in host
right.
community. Now, and the duration of the host community referendum is 90 days, right? It's the longest.
Yep.
So that would put us somewhere in the middle of March
Yep.
As the latest date for that election to occur.
So there is some time. It's depending on circumstances, it could be a compressed time frame, but there's some time for applicants to get their applications ready, to get their background checks, and then to proceed through our process.
Right.
Right now in the schedule, you're showing that the referendum results, you have a brief window by which the town clerks or city clerks or whatever can get those to us, but you still leave it with a window before when the Phase 2 application deadline.
Yeah, that's right. So there's a 10-day certification period in cities, and many towns also follow that same process. So in essence, by roughly about the 17th of March, they would have to have their referendums completed.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
You.
All right, next up is Workforce Development and Supplier Diversity Development, Director Griffin.
Jill.
Oh, yeah, right here, so.
No, Jill.
Oh, me.
You want to see
Oh,
the MGC side?
sorry, I didn't see this vacant seat over here. Little musical chairs on a Thursday. No, I don't mind sitting next to Director Dick. So if you don't mind, can you hear me?
Slide it a little closer.
If you don't mind, I'll focus first on the Penn National Diversity Plan, since we have our guests here. And then I'd be glad to provide you an update. So I'm joined by Corey Whitaker, Vice President for Talent Management, and Karen Bailey of Public Relations for Penn National Gaming. And you may remember at the 126th public meeting on June 26th, you voted to approve the marketing plan for the under and unemployed and the vendor purchasing plan for operations that Penn National Gaming submitted for the Plain Ridge Park Casino. But that was subject to the updates and revisions that were requested by the commission. So specifically, the commission asked for a timeline of related hiring and purchasing activities, specific information regarding community outreach, if through best faith efforts, Penn National was not able to meet their hiring goals in the host and surrounding communities. Additionally, you asked for information on how Penn National plans to utilize resources and services available from the Mass Department of Labor and Workforce Development. So you have before you the two plans with revisions highlighted in yellow beginning on page 19 in the packet. I'm going to have Penn National highlight some of the additions to the plan since the earlier version, but I did want to say that I think Penn National did a very good job in responding to the requested changes, and I think these plans are much stronger. So I would recommend approval.
Thank you, Director Griffin and members of the commission. Great to see you again. Lovely day
Nice
outside.
to see you.
All right, I'll start with our workforce program and some of the additions that we put in. You'll see a variety of inclusions where we basically updated our activities and what we've done since we last spoke and since we last met with you. That's reflected in page 3. We're starting in page 3. You'll also see some additions in page 5. Since then, Corey and her team have met with now have actually had their formal meetings with some of the career centers locally, and then have started the conversation about how we integrate ourselves within the workforce investment boards, which is sort of your regional level groups. Something that we sort of see as sort of down the road is we're working with the locally based career centers in order to get our workforce up and implemented, and then working with the broader employer community within our region. On page 7, we've also provided some additional information as it relates to what our timeframes are, as it relates to our various outreach activities. As of now, we have our career website now active online in the Penn National website. The Career Center will be opening in September, with then job postings coming live at that point in time, and those will continue to be updated as we really, we never stop our job offering updates, but that'll continue all the way through opening day. And then we also anticipate having our larger career center fully functional in December, and then career centers and career fairs taking place in the first quarter of next year. The initial career center is going to be open in September, with the expanded career center opening later this year. We spoke a little last time we were here with regards to the concentric circles that Director Griffin mentioned. So we put in here on page 8 some of those communities that we'll be targeting. It's not an exclusive list. As I mentioned, it's going to be concentric circles, so anybody within sort of those broader circles, we're going to be targeting, with the priority going to those that have higher unemployment rates versus those with lower and don't need necessarily the opportunities or same opportunities. On page 9, or starting on page 9, it actually goes for a couple of pages. You guys you'd asked for some more information about the types of jobs and what is our workforce going to look like. So this is actually a preliminary snapshot of what that workforce looks like as we stand here today. It is subject to some evolution as we move through the hiring process. Ultimately, the teams are going to be designed by the executives that are brought in or hired, not necessarily all brought in, those that are hired at the property level to really put in place their respective teams. So as we stand here today, this is what our workforce is going to look like, the types of jobs and sort of what percentage of the workforce they're going to be comprised of. Below that is a basic time schedule of sort of when the crux of our hiring is going to be, starting obviously very slowly as we ramp up, starting really the second quarter of next year and through opening day of the first or the second half, or first half, end of first half. On page 10, this gives you a snapshot of some of the initial jobs. So this is sort of these are the first to be hired, or the first to be hired out of the general workforce. As you'll see, a lot of administrative functions, your payroll, your general accounting, auditors, revenue. Everybody's touching touching the money parts of the business and getting those systems in place, as well as the initial gaming operations and human resources staff that will be necessary to obviously implement the fuller workforce program. And that, I believe, is all that we have on the workforce program for updates.
Questions? Thoughts?
Just a couple of quick comments and quick notes, and thank you for going through, and the plan reads much better. Not that it didn't read fine before, but the additional detail, I think, makes it a lot more thorough and complete for us to follow. A couple of quick questions. You talked about the outreach to the career centers. Do you feel the career centers cover the surrounding communities and host community well enough for your purposes?
Yeah, I think, yeah, to answer your question, yes. They've met, since we've met with them, they've met to really create a synergy, so they feel that they're all working together to meet our needs amongst all of the different locations. So I feel really positive about our initial meetings and their follow-up meetings, and then meeting again with them next week. But they've been fantastic.
And I appreciate you kind of helped us look beyond the host and surrounding communities to other areas of the high unemployment. I know Jill gave you some numbers from, what communities would be targets in those concentric circles. Taunton is a nearby community which certainly has some employment challenges. I noticed you didn't identify them specifically, but I just want to make sure that they're somewhat in your target area as well.
They will be.
And the only other comment I had was to somewhat put a little bit of an onus now back on us, making sure that we're synced up in terms of you're opening a career center. How can we have a presence or some interaction with respect to licensing? So not only as an employee coming in, learning about the opportunities you have, but also understanding from a licensing requirement what that person needs to go through. So feel free, and David's not here, so we can kind of walk him off the plank and make him available. But we also want to be proactive in terms of being a partner at that career center, so they understand all the licensing requirements they still have to get through. It's just not getting the job, which is great, but there's also our end to it. So you can put the requests of the onus back on us to make that partnership and relationship available to you, and hopefully that speeds things along in terms of getting people through the process.
Always makes it easier, yeah.
Okay, good.
Others?
That's a good point.
I had a couple things. Hank and Michael, we ought to have a link, some kind of a good link, maybe we already do, on our website to the jobs.
Great.
And I think on our employment, we refer to, our employment link is referring to jobs within our own agency. But I don't think the public probably would pick that up. I think we ought to have on our website, when it says employment, it ought to go to the jobs that are out in the field as well. So anything else we can do to promote these opportunities to
Please,
people.
yes, that'd be great.
And even just, Hank, announcing, I mean, this is cool information, these jobs that are going to be, the specific job titles, the percentages,
The timeline.
the timeline. I mean, that's newsworthy, particularly in that area. So maybe collaborating with Penn, try to get that out, and also just through our own social media and stuff.
I don't want to build a website here, but it might be worthwhile to think about having a separate little place on our website for each of the licensees, so that people who are interested in all kinds of things that are going on.
Yeah.
The construction,
Or at least
the jobs.
link, yeah.
That's what I mean.
No.
Yeah.
Commissioners, we currently have a link right now to the construction opportunities at the Plain Ridge racetrack, and it's located on the workforce development page of our website.
Yeah, and as I say, I don't want to build it here and now, but something where somebody's interested in what's going on at Penn, goes to a place, clicks on it, and there's a whole menu of things, pictures, whatever.
Yeah.
People interested in what's going on in MGM, pictures,
Yeah. That's a good idea.
opportunities that come along.
The other question, there are about 25% are jobs are either finance/cage or gaming, which those are the jobs that are going to be at least somewhat industry specific. Do you have a sense of how many, if any, of those jobs require expertise that we're not going to have here? I mean, or all of them things that people can be trained to do, or close enough to other things that you can actually be hired from Massachusetts, even though we don't have gaming?
Sure, the majority of them will be able to hire locally. We'll most likely our VP of Finance.
Right.
We want somebody who has gaming experience, understands gaming. Cage cashiers, bank tellers make a great transition from a bank teller to a cage cashier. Very transferable skill sets. Even cashiers at high volume, establishments sometimes make really good transitions. Accounting is accounting, it's a debit or it's a credit. The analysis sometimes helps to have somebody who has the knowledge of casinos, but probably 90 to 98%, 7% are able to fill locally.
Right. And what are the gaming, the 11 or 12% that are gaming, what are those jobs?
So gaming would be slot attendants, slot operations, slot techs, and again, the majority of those positions will be able to fill locally. We'll bring in some experienced supervision.
Right.
On the slot tech side, we're able to bring in some folks that do have experience, but supplement those with folks that just have a good skill set and they can go through a training program. So that'll be a balance there. But in the slot attendants, we train those all the time. It's somebody with just a really great attitude,
Do we have slot techs, does anybody know, in our community college training
Yes.
process?
Yeah,
We do?
they're working, I think,
Great.
Yep.
Bristol on developing.
Glad I asked
It's not
that
a high
question.
volume.
It's a good answer.
It's, yeah.
Great. Okay, anybody else? Great.
Great.
Thank you,
Thanks very
very
much.
helpful.
No, it's very
Thank you.
helpful. Yeah, it's great.
Thanks.
So we'll go on to the second plan.
Second plan. Yes, thank you. And this is the plan associated with our vendor diversity program. This one doesn't have quite as many updates, didn't require quite as many updates as the workforce plan, but I'll run through those quickly starting on page 4 of our plan. Just some updates of the outreach that we've done since we last met. On to page 6, we revised the definition of minority to be reflective of the state's definition to clarify that. On page 7, we did put in some of the examples or clarifying some of the definitions of what is excluded spend based on the AGA diversity purchasing guidelines. This gave a little more flavor and outline as to what exactly those terms meant. And that's page 7. And then on page 9, and you may have received this separately, or at least staff may have received this separately, but we put a snapshot into the purchasing program and the calendar associated with it, as well as what it is exactly we're going to be buying over the next several months. So it gives just a quick snapshot again, subject to some flexibility based on the construction schedules and so forth, but generally anybody that's interested in potentially looking at business with us can get a good idea of what we're going to be purchasing prior to opening. These are pre-opening, this is the pre-opening purchasing program.
The updates, again, are great. Again, I'll throw the licensing team under the bus and tell them that they should be at your reverse vendor fair on the 25th of September. And I appreciated the snapshot of your buying schedule, because I think that would begin to give our vendor advisory team, the chambers and everybody else some kind of step. I mean, just making this calendar available, you can begin to get a sense of who wants to step forward and have that opportunity. Obviously, some of this stuff breaks down to one-time purchases versus kind of an ongoing spending relationship.
Right.
But
And I failed to highlight one thing. We are doing, we took your advice and are now putting together or creating a site within our site that allows for us to post RFPs or anytime contracts are going to be available, whether it's pre-opening or post-opening, so that people can have that active, accessible information as it relates to contracts related to this facility.
Great. Questions, anything? Again,
I have just one out of curiosity. It doesn't, as I look at the buying schedule on page 9, why do you have to buy Coca-Cola in the first quarter
I
of
was wondering about that too.
2015?
A lot of that tends to be contract negotiations, so even though we have a national contract with Coca-Cola, being able to get the supply line put into place, because we obviously sell a lot of it, so getting that into the streamline for Coca-Cola, as well as making sure that we're set on our pricing and everything associated with that.
Oh, it's not cans.
No, it's big jugs.
Thank you.
It was interesting. The only brand name in the whole list is Coca-Cola. It does
Right.
jump out. Again, Hank and Michael and Jill, is the cross promotion with these things. People are going to come to our site looking for help, and we ought to make sure it's real easy. I'm not sure what there is now, but and promoting it again. The specificity of this, Hank, is an interesting kind of newsworthy stuff. And the schedule. Anything else? Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Very excited.
job.
I believe a vote is,
Oh, is there a vote?
yes,
Oh, okay.
On the second or
before
both?
they leave,
On both?
On both?
on both.
Mr. Chair, I'd move that, can we do both at once, or do we need separate votes? Do both at once. Mr. Chair, I'd move that the commission give final approval to the Plain Ridge Park Casino strategic plan to engage and recruit the diverse under- and unemployed workforce population, and the Plain Ridge Park Casino purchasing practices plan for local and traditionally disadvantaged and diverse businesses.
Second?
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks
you
very
very
much.
much.
Good stuff.
Thanks for your good work.
Thank you.
Okay.
So Commissioners, I just wanted to update you, provide you a brief update on what's been going on and how I've been spending my time. In addition to working with Penn National regarding their diversity plans and making sure the public has access to the documents and an opportunity to comment, we, of course, have been providing them resources with our vendor advisory team and assistance when they need it. So, for example, We connected them with all our veteran resources recently. In addition to Penn, I'm starting to work with, I just had a conversation recently with MGM out in Springfield, and they're going to be meeting with our vendor team on the 25th of August, and we're starting to work on on their diversity plan. Other ongoing work includes just keeping track of the diversity hiring and the contracting work with our licensee, meeting bi-weekly with Pink & Company to make sure that I know what's going on down there. And continuing to work with my colleagues at the Mass Gaming Commission also regarding the licensing of training schools and our relationship with with DPL, the Division of Professional Licensure. I'm starting to dive into workforce issues, looking ahead to when the Category 1 resort casinos begin construction and operation. We're exploring how we implement best practices to ensure diversity during design and construction. I had recent meetings, for example, with the Carpenters Union and the Boston Building Trades Council, really looking to learn more about their pre-apprenticeship program, building pathways. We met recently also with members of the policy group on tradeswomen, on best practices for increasing gender and racial diversity on construction sites. And we're also exploring other possible collaborations with public entities that have billions of dollars of construction in the pipeline to see if we can leverage best practices.
When you had the meeting with the group to explore more women and minorities, did they have any ideas that?
Actually,
Absolutely.
they had some great ideas that we hope to share with our licensees. They have recently just published a best practices guide that talks a little bit, that talks about exactly what you can do to increase women on the construction site. And what I'd like to do is perhaps in the future invite them to share the information with the commission and with the licensees as well. It was a very productive meeting.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's what we've been looking for is, how do you
Specifics.
get it from the warm and fuzzy to really operational, institutionalizable practices that will make a difference, really tangible plans. And as Jill has been going around talking to people, we have learned a lot of real stuff. This is not rocket science, this is blocking and tackling. If you try hard enough, you will find people of diverse backgrounds and women to take these positions, and if you don't, you won't. But we've picked up a lot of really specific strategies, and we're going to talk a lot more about this. But Jill has picked up a lot of other ideas that have kind of been floating around, and she and Commissioner Stebbins and I have been exploring the idea of getting Massport and the Convention Center Authority and the Gaming Commission to team up, because amongst us we have a huge amount of A, construction coming along, and B, hospitality employment coming along. And if we could organize our efforts together and push programs together, that is a lot of muscle. So we met now with Massport and the Convention Center together. They have all agreed to work with us on 4 particular ideas. One is to figure out how we can facilitate the link between small businesses and particularly diverse small businesses, but small businesses and financial institutions, so they can get the capital and get the credit and so forth to take advantage of all these opportunities as we're pushing these businesses to reach out to these kind of businesses. Second is to dramatically strengthen the pipeline of minority and women in the construction trades, and get everybody involved so you don't have the unions saying they're not looking hard enough and the companies saying they don't have any, so everybody gets in the same room and adopts the same strategies. Unite Here has a small hospitality training center that's similar to the big one they have in Las Vegas. They've been interested in trying to expand the capacity of the hospitality training center, and we've talked with them about maybe the three public agencies together could, what's your plan for outreach? What would it cost to expand the facility? Are there the bodies to be trained? And we're meeting with Unite Here and the other institutions, and Unite Here has also spoken to Mayor Walsh, and Mayor Walsh wants Felix Arroyo from his office to be a part of it. So anyway, there's a lot of interest behind that one. And then the last one, a guy named Daryl Settles, who's a businessman in town, and I think actually serves on the Convention Center Authority Board, has been talking about some kind of an entrepreneurial training center that could be focused on minority entrepreneurs and helping them develop the tools to be successful, and we're pursuing that one too. So all four of those ideas, most of them come right out of all the digging that Commissioner Stebbins and Director Griffin have been doing. But they're interesting enough that we've been able to coalesce this big, potentially really big institutional effort behind it.
That's really exciting.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
So I'll just add that the financing piece that Chairman Crosby mentioned was something that grew out of a meeting with the Greater New England Minority Supplier Development Council, the Supplier Diversity Office for the state, and the MBDA Boston Business Center. So they highlighted a specific need that minority businesses tend to have regarding financing, and the potential need for contract financing, for example, to help them grow or to meet the needs should they get a contract with a casino. We want to make sure that they're successful. So we've partnered with the SBA and other financial institutions, and we really hope to, or plan to, roll out this idea further. So you'll be hearing more and more about that.
Excellent, thank you.
And one final bit of good news that we heard about this week with the introduction of the Oyster Bar at Plain Ridge. Now all of a sudden our friends at Fisheries are getting all excited about it.
Oh, great.
Yes, yes.
One example, the kind of very practical advice we got from this group that Jill was talking about women in the trades. The woman who runs this program drew a triangle, a pyramid, and talked about how it's, where the efforts have been in the past has been at the level, for example, in our situation, Penn National and Turner have the right intentions, say all the right things, try hard, but you start to go down the layer of responsibility, and you finally get to the subcontractors. And within the subcontractors, you've got a vast range of interest. Some get it, really interested, some are utterly uninterested. But the subcontractors are the one who interact with the unions to actually do the hiring. So if you don't create traction between the subcontractors and the unions, and if you don't have mechanisms in place to hold the subcontractors accountable, and if you don't have a way to get the subcontractors and the unions in the same room so they can't both lie about what the other one is not doing, you won't be successful.
Well, and I think a secondary issue certainly has to be retention. It might be blocking and tackling to get people in the door, but I think it's another issue when you talk about retention in this area. So,
Right. So the other point was to a successful monitoring system that included all parties at the table, the unions, the primes, and the licensee, as well as the commission. So regular review of the numbers. So it was very helpful, and like I said,
We'll bring Susan Moyer in someday. You will like this woman.
Yeah. She knows her stuff.
Look forward to it.
Sounds great.
She was also clear, she said, you get all the systems in place, we've got the best practices, but she said, here's the steps, we'll give you the steps, but there's one other thing you need, and that's a badass champion. And she is a serious badass champion.
Thank you.
That's great, thanks.
Great, thank you.
Great. Let's take a quick break before we invite Mark up, because that's going to take a while. Ready to reconvene? Is Jill out there?
I just walked by her in the hall.
I just wondered.
Headed the opposite way.
Maybe she's going home. Okay. I just forgotten this group that we were talking about that has been so interesting in helping people meet diversity objectives. Ran the project for the construction work at the Integrated Science Center, which is one of the 2 new buildings being built at UMass Boston.
Right.
And the numbers that they attained, do you remember them, Bruce? It's incredible.
It's much higher than, obviously, the administrative bulletin stuff.
It was like 49% minority, I think, 82% citizens of Boston, 49% minority, and 17% women or something.
This is
Incredible.
construction?
It's construction for the building of this $800 million building on the UMass Boston campus, just by using these mechanisms and not taking no for an answer. Really impressive. Okay, item number 6 on our agenda is Director Vanderlinden.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you.
I'm pleased to bring back before you for your consideration and recommendations the Responsible Gaming Framework. I think by way of process, I'll give you a little bit of background on it, the rationale for why we've done it, the process, before I dive into the strategies that are being recommended. If that's okay with you. Okay. So the Responsible Gaming Framework provides an approach through which the Massachusetts Gaming Commission licensees can ensure that their general gaming practices are consistent with the Commission's expectations that the licensed businesses will be conducted in a responsible manner to minimize harm caused by gambling to individuals, families, and communities. The framework supports the implementation of the expanded gaming law, as it includes a number of key mandates to ensure the successful implementation of expanded gaming, including protection for host and surrounding communities and mitigation of the social impacts and costs. The framework and the measures contained within are intended to inform gaming regulation in Massachusetts, provide an overall orientation to responsible gaming practices and policy adopted by licensees, and provide the general public with a concise description of the measures taken by the Commission and its licensees as designed to mitigate unwanted consequences of expanded gaming. The Responsible Gaming Framework is based on a commitment by the Massachusetts Gaming Commission and its licensees and guiding value of ethical and responsible gaming behavior. Just by way of, I wanted to give you a couple of the key terms. There are many definitions of what responsible gaming is. There's many definitions of what problem gambling is. We selected these definitions intentionally. We felt that it best fit the needs of this framework. So as we define responsible gaming in this framework, responsible gaming is the provision of gambling services in a way that seeks to minimize harm to customers and the community associated with gambling. Problem gambling is characterized by difficulties in limiting money and/or time spent on gambling, which leads to a continuum of adverse consequences for the gambler, others, and the community. That definition I would just want to provide a little bit of background on. There is the clinical definition of what a gambling disorder is, and this terms would fall in the far side of the continuum of gambling-related harm. We want to recognize that gambling harm can fall in a whole continuum from minimal harm all the way to disordered gambling, and that it's not just limited to the individual. It also includes harm that could be caused to families as well as to communities.
So there's a disjunctive between time and money in that definition. Why is time standing alone indicative of a problem? Some people watch too much television.
Correct, but what does watching too much television, or in this case, what does participating in gambling too frequently or too often, how does that impact their life? It doesn't necessarily just fall to money. That wouldn't be a very good way to look at it. But if you include time in there, what is the impact on family life, on your work-life balance, on other types of relationships that you may have, that can actually cross the line and become harmful to the individual.
I get it, but that can also be said of, and I wasn't being entirely facetious, too much television, too much time on the computer, too much time on the iPhone, pulling out the iPhone at dinner with your significant other. Why is time alone something that ought to be dealt with in a set of regulations or a set of responsible gaming practices, as apart from that other part of the continuum of isolating?
Put it another way, it's a really interesting point. Is there a phenomenon of people who we would consider to be problem gamblers whose problem is only too much time and it doesn't have anything to do with money? Is it a separate issue?
Right. It would be one of the diagnostic criteria of a gambling disorder, where it's preoccupation with gambling. It would be time spent gambling that would impact your relationships with families and work and others. So I think, I don't have the exact words of the criteria, DSM criteria for a gambling disorder, but it is contained within at least two of the criteria, I would say, within that gambling disorder.
Well, I hear that, but I've observed, I've said what I've said. I have observed the kind of isolating behavior caused by other devices and other pursuits, and wonder, and I'll come back to it, I'll think more about it, I'd welcome talking to you more about it, of why time alone is something that ought to concern us in a way that's different from the isolating time spent on other devices.
Right.
Or pursuits.
Yeah, and again, it's a couple points that I would make to that. It's on a continuum, and so all the way from minimal amount of harm to extreme harm, for one, and two, you can't define a problem gambling by money alone. So what are the other ways in which you can define? You would need to consider what are the other ways you would consider it, and time would be probably the second.
Well, you could, but you'd define it. I mean, you could define it. Maybe we haven't, but you could define it by tangible harms like uncontrollable money loss. You could define it that way.
Yep. Yes, agreed.
All right.
And you were really just taking exception to the word "or," right?
Yes, and because, it's...
If it said "and," we wouldn't be having this conversation.
First of all, I think this is an enormously important effort. I've got a lot of questions, but I think it's an enormously important effort. And, I just wonder what the limits of it are. But you're right, it's the or.
It's the "or."
Okay.
I think it's interesting.
Okay. And Commissioner, we certainly, if we can wordsmith the definition of problem gambling, if you feel like as we're going through this document that there's a definition that would more readily accomplish the task.
Well, that's why I'm glad we're having this discussion today before we vote on it, because I would like to think about it. And as I say, I applaud the effort, and I applaud the energy that's gone into it, and it's enormously important. So nothing I say today should detract from that.
But I also think, this is, on the one hand, it's two letters, O-R, but on the other hand, especially something like this, we really want to have clear, precise thinking. We don't want can't, we don't want we don't want myths, we don't want emotion. We want this to be really rigorous, well thought out. And the kind of question Commissioner McHugh is asking is precisely that kind of rigor. And maybe or should be there, but this is
Yeah,
the
maybe it
kind
should.
of, this is the kind of rigor that we
Yeah.
want to bring to this. This is not a place to be cutting corners on the clarity of our thought.
Absolutely. And I have to say, we struggled with a definition for problem gambling, and we looked at many different definitions. And in fact, there is no clear winner. There's nothing that stands alone, and that's why we selected that. And so I think that I could not agree more, Mr. Chairman, that we should look at this critically. And I want to get this right. I want the commission to feel comfortable, and I want this to be the document that kind of drives forward efforts as we address and look at mitigating problem gambling and promoting responsible gambling. So,
Can I say something? Because I happen to be a lot more familiar with the efforts, perhaps than Chairman Crosby as well. Could you describe the process a little bit more that's taken you to today? Maybe you were about to do that, but there's been in the acknowledgments there's a very small piece that acknowledges the mass partnership on responsible gaming, and I had the luxury of going to the last meeting, and there's a lot of great work that has happened, including the licensees and applicants, and the feedback that they brought throughout this process. So, I think it would be really helpful if you describe that a little bit more.
Gladly. I think that the process for the framework began last October 28th to be exact, as we had a responsible gaming forum that was hosted by the commission, and we invited a number of experts. We had a couple local experts. There's a wealth of knowledge in the Boston area, but we also invited a number of experts just in the field in general, national and even from Canada, to talk about different elements of responsible gaming and provide the commission with some background information and some recommendations on how to move forward. From that point, I worked closely with Dr. Jeff Murata of Problem Gambling Solutions, as well as the Massachusetts Council on Compulsive Gambling, Marlene Warner. We took a look, did an extensive research, looked at a broad range of resources, including we did a literature review looking at academic papers. We looked at policy papers, investigative reports, jurisdictional reviews, corporate reporting documents, legislation in Massachusetts and as well as in other jurisdictions. I have those listed here, as well as just a very small sample of the most influential documents that inform the framework. That first draft was presented to the commission in March of this year. The draft was then put out for public comment. We received extensive public comment, extensive support, as well as extensive criticism of the document. We decided that we would take it a step further and make sure that we really pay attention to what the critique of the document was. And when I brought it back before the commission in May to just kind of figure out what our next steps are after we received the feedback, we decided to further engage interested parties, I'll say. It certainly included our licensees, and it certainly included the applicants, but there were a number of other individuals that expressed interest in this document, and that included the National Center for Responsible Gambling, the American Gaming Association, even the Attorney General's Office, the National Council on Problem Gambling, all of whom had an interest in what we were doing in Massachusetts in this document specifically, and we invited their input. We use the Massachusetts Council on Compulsive Gambling. They have a partnership for responsible gaming that bubbled up as a program out of their operation, as kind of the organizing body to talk about the issues that came up and make sure that we were settling. I wouldn't say necessarily compromise, but we made sure that we got all of the issues on the table and we're looking at it from all angles.
Explain who's in the partnership.
That's great. Yeah, the partnership, it included WIN, it included Mohegan Sun, it included Penn, it included MGM. It also included the Massachusetts Lottery. Beth Bresnahan has attended those meetings. And in addition, Christine Riley, Research Director for the National Center for Responsible Gaming, attended. The American Gaming Association, their Director of Research, attended by phone. Keith White from the National Council on Problem Gambling, their Executive Director, attended regularly, in addition to the Mass Council on Compulsive Gambling. Overall, I think it was absolutely the right step to take this back out, to step back from it, take a look at what the issues were, and make sure that we fully vetted, and got the feedback and heard different points of view on it. We had 3 meetings with the Mass Partnership for Responsible Gaming to take a look at, I would say, what were the kind of the highest, the strategies that got the most attention or the most criticism. And that included, I believe it was credit extension, responsible gaming information centers, and as we defined it in the first draft, pre-commitment. There were others, but those were the 3 that we really targeted to make sure that we fully discussed those.
Is that what you're looking for?
Yes. Thank you.
So that sort of leads into my next, the next sort of thematic question that I had, and that is, this is not or is it a consensus document?
I would not call it a consensus document. I would say that, and as we go through the strategies, I'll point out where there remains some disagreement, I would say, in terms of where our applicants and licensees land and what the recommendations are.
Let me actually speak to, let me
Just if I could finish
Yeah.
that. Is that the principal divide, i.e. between us and the applicants or licensees, or is there?
That may be oversimplifying it. And I don't necessarily know where the full extent of where that divide is.
No, but I mean, is there any divide between this document and, let's call them the responsible gaming forces?
There's wide support and general consensus that this is a solid document from that sector.
From that sector, yeah.
Correct.
So to the extent that, I don't want to oversimplify it, I'm just trying to understand. So the extent a divide exists, it's between the document and the applicants and licensees?
Correct.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
I would include the American Gaming Association in that as well, in the feedback that we received from them.
Okay.
To this point specifically, at the last partnership meeting where we talked at great length about what was in the earlier draft referred to as pre-commitment, which is the most controversial issue, I said explicitly that Mark has gone out of his way to want to make this document something that everybody buys off on, if it's possible.
Right.
But it is not meant to be a race to the bottom. We have
I
asked Mark.
understand.
No, I'm just explaining what the thought process was, so everybody knows. What we have asked Mark is to give us his best judgment about what he thinks we ought to do apropos of responsible gaming. If that can be something that everybody else buys into, terrific, and that's the strategy that Mark has been trying to use. If it turns out that it's not, then we're asking him to give us his best judgment. We may or may not agree with it, but that's in the end, you're going to get in a document here what Mark thinks in the final analysis is the way we ought to go.
Gotcha. But it also would be helpful in analyzing it to know where the principal points of
Absolutely,
disagreement are.
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
You will. One last introductory thing, just make the comment, tell about the phone call you had from the Canadian researcher yesterday, just so people get a sense of the context of where this fits in the world.
Right. It's received pretty wide support from different entities. Certainly the National Council on Problem Gambling, Keith White, has been incredibly supportive in applauding this document. Yesterday I had a conversation with Jamie Weeb, who is the research director at the Ontario Responsible Gaming Council, and they've done extensive review of different issues, responsible gaming issues, but probably most recently, she had led an effort to evaluate the pre-commitment program in Nova Scotia. I forwarded to her the document just for her general feedback, and she called back a couple hours later and said that she had never seen a document that was so well put together, and was a bit surprised, I think, that it came from a U.S. jurisdiction. That generally these types of plans, this has not been done in the United States before, which I think is another important point to make. This type of framework has not been done in a U.S. state that I've know of. I certainly haven't seen it. It hasn't been widely distributed, but it has been done in other jurisdictions. And she said it was well put together. It was well thought out, and the strategy seemed quite comprehensive.
Great.
Okay. I wanted to talk just a moment about the guiding values and approach. I'm not going to read to you the mission statement of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission. I suspect you all know that. But as I see it, there are three main points to it. First is to provide the greatest economic development benefits and revenues to the people of the Commonwealth. Two is to reduce to the maximum extent possible the potential negative and unintended consequences of the new legislation or of gaming. And three is to allow an appropriate return on investment for gaming providers that assures the operation of casino resorts of the highest quality. I think that this is an important point, and as we look to pull this framework together, I couldn't. You can't just pull one out and say this outweighs everything else. What we tried to do was present a framework, and the recommendations, the strategies, the measures are balanced with the other two priorities that are identified within the mission. Okay. In terms of the approach, the responsible gaming framework, we've adopted an evidence-based approach. The problem with an evidence-based approach in terms of responsible gaming is there isn't very much evidence. There's very little consensus.
It's a big problem.
If you want to, if you look at a different field, if you look at if you look at the mental health field, if you look at substance abuse, just per se, it includes a lot of identified best practices, peer-reviewed, empirical data that would support different types of intervention or prevention initiatives. Very little of that exists within the responsible gaming realm, or even within the problem gambling realm. And so we tried to adopt that evidence-based approach where necessary, where there was sound evidence or research available, but where there wasn't, where it was completely missing, where it was ambiguous or uncertain, we adopted a precautionary approach. And I think that this is an important point. The precautionary approach, it rejects the notion that the risks are acceptable until harm has been proven, or that risk can continue unmitigated until such a time as the effectiveness of harm minimization measure is proven. While the responsible gaming measures will be evaluated and continuously improved on, measures driven by a precautionary approach will be subject to a more rigorous type of evaluation, measures that you all would approve.
Mark, excuse me, apropos of Commissioner McHugh's question, this is one of the places where you do get pushback. What Mark just said sounds logical, but there is a theory that you hear often in this business that we shouldn't do anything that hasn't been peer-reviewed. We shouldn't implement any policy that hasn't been peer-reviewed. One way to look at it, that's another way of saying you can't do very much because nothing's been peer-reviewed. Hardly anything's been peer-reviewed. And so that's Mark's taking this position as explicitly as he is actually a somewhat controversial policy.
Yeah, and I agree with the approach, but we also talked some time ago about the possibility of getting data and doing some of this precautionary, taking the precautionary approach in a setting in which there were control groups so that you could get some data. Some places that's not possible, I'm sure, but some places it may be. So in discussing this, I wanted to follow up. Has there been any thought given to executing that approach to any of this? And if not, why not?
Yes, there has been some consideration of that, and it depends on what measure that we're talking about. I think that there's a number of different options. If we could, as we get through the measures, and we could talk about different options that we perhaps have through different measures, so that have been at least been discussed. And I think that may answer your questions without straying too far right now.
Well, let's just to be direct about this, the lingering big issue still is the so-called pre-commitment issue. I don't think there's much controversy about almost anything else that's in here now, I don't think. And on that issue, both MGM and Penn National have expressed some willingness to consider the possibility of a real test on various aspects of this program.
That's exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about.
I know, so it's easy.
And that's
a lot
an
easier
an ideal one to pick, because it seems to me it would be fairly easy to set up a control group.
Well, it's really pretty hard to do, but in any case, we're very much looking at it, and we're in conversations with at least 2 companies about the possibility of doing it.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Now, in terms of specific comments, when is the right time to do that? And does that depend on the level of the comment?
Yeah, specifically regarding pre-commitment, I think that...
No, not just as we go through this document. And I'll be happy just to send comments to you, but I had a comment about the balance that you've struck here. The potential harms that can be associated with gambling are balanced with generating the greatest possible revenues. I mean, is that kind of comment something I should make offline to you?
I would prefer...
How should we, by consensus, how should we do this?
I think we should, anything
You should bring it up right here, I
remotely
think.
substantive, I would
Yeah.
bring it up. This is the
Okay.
time, and this is
Okay.
going
This is
to be
it.
one of our seminal documents. So.
Okay. So I wonder at that balance, if it were liquor that we were talking about, I think everybody would shrink from that balance. And we're not committed in our mission statement to generating the greatest possible revenues. We're committed to generating and ensuring the generation of a rate of return that's sufficient to operate first-class facilities and provide a reasonable rate of return. And that strikes me as a much better balance for assessing the harms. Because the harms, when measured against the greatest possible revenues, are likely to come out on the losing end.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
So that's a comment I
Okay.
offer.
Yeah, I think that perhaps there needs to be some wordsmithing in there, because I think that was the intention of that statement, and it obviously was lost in there.
Okay.
Go ahead.
You know, and I think that actually that leads to one of the regulatory objectives too, the very first regulatory objective, as we move into the next page, looking at the goals and objectives. The goal is to create a sustainable, measurable, socially responsible, and accountable approach to gaming. Within that goal, we identify three different types of objectives: regulatory, research, and education. I think that Commissioner, your point is captured in the first, and I don't know if you feel like perhaps that is better said in that regulatory objective, but the regulatory objective to minimize harm from gambling to individuals, families, and communities commensurate with the good of the Commonwealth and gaming licensees. The second regulatory objective, to promote best and promising responsible gaming practices in all aspects of licensees' activities. And the third being to utilize principles of responsible gaming in introducing all new and emerging technologies. The research objectives inform best practices in responsible gaming strategies and methods, problem gambling treatment and prevention, and responsible gaming messaging. And the second, create and translate knowledge to support evidence-informed decision-making about gambling policy and regulation. Education objectives include providing accurate and balanced information to enable informed choices to be made about gaming activities, provide patrons adversely affected by gambling to timely access and appropriate information on problem gambling and where assistance in dealing with such matters can be obtained. And finally, to create a shared understanding of responsible gaming practices among individuals, communities, and the gambling industry and the government. So next is moving on to the strategies. There are 5 strategies that I identify, and with each of those strategies, there are a number of different practice considerations that I'll go over. But just generally to kick it off, the 5 are to commit to corporate social responsibility, to enhance personal responsibility, to provide protections within the physical environment, to ensure responsible marketing, to limit high-risk financial transactions, and finally to engage the community.
Ensure responsible marketing does not show up on my draft.
Okay.
Yeah, there's 6. It's missing from the summary, but it's in the document.
Got it. Okay.
I'm working from the red line version, and that was there originally, and it's now stricken out.
Yeah, it's just a
Took
typo.
it out.
It just didn't make it
It's
in.
missing on your list here, on
Okay.
that page, so it's not a big deal.
Okay, very good. I'll make sure I correct that. Okay. One thing that I'd like to point out one is that it seems like a lot of these measures are directed towards our licensees. But I also want to point out, much as this process has been, is that it's not them in isolation that is carrying it out. That we as a commission have a responsibility, that the Department of Public Health has a responsibility. There are a number of people, of entities that have a responsibility to ensuring the successful implementation of the responsible gaming strategies, and that includes how they're implemented, how they're evaluated, and how they're carried out.
That raises, for me, a question about the middle paragraph below the list there. The first sentence, the responsible gaming framework strategies and practices will be monitored and evaluated regularly for effectiveness and fidelity. The original draft said by MGC licensees, and now there's just a period without saying who is going to do this. I assume that was intentional. But
That was intentional. And I think that was feedback that we had received from the first draft that had questions of why that fell exclusively onto them. And I think that was absolutely right, that there is a shared responsibility in overseeing that. Rightfully so, that it shouldn't fall just to us, it shouldn't fall just to them.
I fully agree. But is it worth saying that here?
Maybe like by all parties.
Well, by listing it, by MGC, the licensees, DPH.
Okay.
I don't know, I just, this is a discussion item, it's not a,
You know, I actually had a related question, a related point on that when we got to strategy 2. Because I think there's a clear role for the MGC, there. So I think it is in the details, I guess. When we're talking in a summary level, maybe it's kind of hard to pinpoint. If we're talking about specific strategies or eventually regulation, that clearly is better understood.
well, I understand that. It just seems to me that if we're going to have an overarching strategy, which we are, it'd be worthwhile to say something about who we expect to be our partners in making this thing work at some kind of a high level. Maybe it's just by many different public and private agencies, and then the details come later. But it seems to me it's worthwhile saying that something about who we think is going to do this.
It is captured to some degree in guiding values and approach that MGC believes that licensees do not have an isolated role in minimizing the potential harm of gambling. Government, science, industry, and gaming consumers must all take a part to most effectively minimize harm caused or exacerbated by gambling. And I don't know.
Okay. I just raised the point.
Sure.
Think about it. Makes sense.
As I pointed out before, that there really is not great science backing up a lot of responsible gaming strategies. It's a relatively young area. And I make a point at the bottom of the strategy section to state that as best practices change, as technology emerges, that we will continue to evaluate our approach and change in response to those emerging and best practices. Moving on to the strategies, the first of the 6 strategies, which is to commit to corporate social responsibility. So generally speaking, the aim of corporate social responsibility is to minimize the negative environmental and social impacts and maximize the positive impacts. To demonstrate a commitment to promote responsible gaming and addressing problem gambling, each licensee will include responsible gaming policies within their code of ethics and implement a responsible gaming plan. So these documents will be specific to licensees' operations in order to educate employees about responsible gaming and their role in promoting a responsible gaming.
Let's not read each one of these.
No, okay.
I don't think.
Sure.
On this strategy, Mark, I had a bullet number 1 and bullet number 5 seem to be redundant.
So that would be to educate employees about responsible gaming and their role in promoting a responsible gaming environment, inclusive of the requirement that all employees participate in MGC-approved responsible gaming employee training programs, and provide employees with clear statements of expectations and responsibilities, including an emphasis on the importance of employees in promoting responsible gaming and creating a healthy gaming environment. Okay. The first bullet is specific about training. Obviously, I think that without identifying and diving too deep into what is the content of the employee training that we would recommend, it's stating that that's an important element of corporate social responsibility. In the 5th one, providing employees with a clear statement of expectations and responsibilities, including an emphasis on the importance of employees in promoting responsible gaming. I believe one deals more with like an actual training curriculum, a training program, and the other perhaps would be better suited to be included in a code of ethics or a general guiding statement.
Any questions about any of those bullet points under strategy 1?
Okay.
Looks good.
Okay. So in the spirit of not just reading from this document, which I fully support, we would move on then to strategy 2, which is enhanced personal responsibility. And I want to say that that includes this overarching idea of implementing or using an informed decision-making framework. The informed decision-making framework was developed by the Responsible Gaming Council, the Ontario Responsible Gaming Council. It is a pretty lengthy document where I provide a summary of it in section 2.1, provide a little bit more detail in Appendix A, but it is certainly a document that has much more content to it, but I think that this captures a general idea.
I had a question with this informed decision-making. So because you're talking about it with regard to personal responsibility, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, I had a question about reading the definition of the intensive gambler, which there's no negative connotation there. Would you agree? It's just outlining the fact that the person may gamble weekly, correct?
Weekly or more.
Yeah,
Correct.
and then when we get to the informed decision-making, when you talk about the intensive gambler, there really is a negative connotation to that piece of it. And I was just wondering if we were taking too big a leap to do that. So if you look at, under the informed decision-making, the self-assessment tools, when you go to intensive, do you know what I'm saying? It really talks about
So intensive, speaking from Appendix A, where intensive gamblers need to be informed of their play activity and offered self-assessment tools that draw attention to the consequences of their actions and the options available for help in addressing them.
Yeah, so I think we're making the leap that there's a problem, because just because you're an intensive gambler, and, do you know what I'm saying? And I
Right.
wonder if that's too big a leap to take there.
Sure, sure.
So are you talking about the bullet point in Appendix A?
Well, I was reading intensive, and then I see that it really is, you're almost insinuating that this person has a problem. And when you look at the definition of an intensive gambler, it just means that they go at least on a weekly basis. So I just thought it just appeared to me when I read that we were kind of making a leap there that, I would think, to get back to the alcohol analogy, if someone drinks weekly, I don't think the assumption would be that there's a problem,
Right.
per se.
I get your point. I just wasn't sure which language
Yeah,
you thought conveyed that. I couldn't.
It's under, I'm sorry, I wasn't clear. It's under self-assessment tools, and it talks about, it's on the Appendix A of informed decision-making.
Well, it's down in content, cautionary information help options.
Right, correct. Correct, and it's, but I don't know, it just seemed to me that was making a leap, because it's underneath intensive gamblers. Do you see that?
Right.
Where it says
Which-
cautionary information help options? No.
Yes, yes.
No, it's in the chart.
Well, yes, so I'm looking at both places. I'm looking at the chart, and then above where we talk about intensive
Yeah,
gamblers.
and
Right.
the
Well,
third bullet point
Yeah,
there.
the third bullet, yes.
The third bullet point is exactly the same as on the strategy itself. The language is exactly the same.
Well, but if you look at what an intensive gambler is, do you know what I'm saying? It's kind of,
It's the same. The definition of intensive gambler on the strategy is exactly the same as the definition of intensive gambler on Appendix A.
well, so there are two areas then in which I only caught it here.
Okay,
that
fine, that's fine.
We are taking what an intensive gambler is and really now saying that means there's a problem.
Okay.
So I just.
I don't actually see it that way, but it's worth, looking at it carefully, trying not to make that, because you're not trying to make that judgment, right? You're just trying to say intensive gamblers, it is in their interest to have certain tools available to them.
Yeah.
Without judging that an intensive gambler is ipso facto in trouble.
To me, I see it as you go down the spectrum, the type of information that's presented becomes more personalized to that individual and their play, and that once you reach the point of the intensive gambler, you want to begin discussing at least what are the options for help that would be available. I think this goes back to Commissioner McHugh's question about time and defining.
It does, I agree.
And I actually am beginning to see that problem in this statement here, where casual, frequent, and intensive have frequency connected to it, and I think that is problematic, because I think that it isn't a continuum of casual to frequent to intensive in all cases. I think that people's gambling behavior tends to ebb and flow, especially frequent and intensive gamblers. And that putting those types of time limits on it, I don't think you can deny time as a factor, but I think that rigidly defining it in terms of time is problematic, as is done in the informed decision-making framework, because that's what you're drawn to. That you suddenly start to question, well, is weekly too much, or is not? Is it weekly every week, or is it weekly if you go gambling 3 days?
Not only
on a
that,
weekend?
the length of each session, is not captured
Well,
here.
there may be a way to say this. I think this information is important, but I think there's a way to say it without implying. When I read that, I think there's an implication that, there's a consequence to your action. We were addressing a problem here. So I just think there's probably a way to say that doesn't necessarily make the connection of weekly gambler to a problem.
But it's more than how we phrase it here, isn't it? It does get back to the same thing. There are a lot of people that go to the VFW for a couple of beers every Saturday night to be with their friends, or go to a pub. And would we say that because they do that, they need some personalized intervention? I'm not sure. I don't know. But I don't know that we do here either. Or whether it's whether there's a more sophisticated calculus that needs to be created before we start intervening with help options. This is not my field of expertise. I don't know. Just as a one regulator, I wonder about that.
Right. And the essence of informed decision-making is, as people's gambling becomes more intensive on that spectrum, so should the information that would be directed towards them. Whereas as casual, taking specifically casual gamblers, non-problem gamblers, or even risky gamblers, that the type of information that you would make available to them would be kind of very, very generalized, in increasing their awareness.
I understand the concept, Mark. I'm not quarreling with the concept. I'm just quarreling, and I don't even know if I'm quarreling. I'm asking about. Not quarreling. I'm asking about the criteria for categorization, right? Is the mere fact that a person spends 2 hours, 3 hours at a gambling facility every Saturday night a trigger for more intensive, more personalized delivery of help options? I guess that's the best way I could put it. And use the analogy of the person that goes to the VFW, the person that goes to the pub, the person that goes out for a couple of drinks with his or her buddies on Saturday nights. That would not lead us to say you need a more personalized intervention about going to the movies instead of the pub.
I would question what are the adverse consequences that would result from that behavior.
From what?
And whether you're using the analogy of the VFW on a Saturday night. If you're going to have a couple beers at the VFW on a Saturday night, and you have 2 or 3, and it crosses the line and you're driving while intoxicated, the level of feedback that perhaps those consequences are quite high versus...
We weren't talking about driving, though.
Okay.
I mean, I think there's a clear distinction.
You know, I'm reminded of a problem gambling conference session that I attended. This woman from the Ontario Lottery Corporation was talking about predictors of problem gambling, and they had a series of measures, and one of them was changes in time, not time by itself, but changes in time, frequency. If the person goes every Saturday and they can manage, and that's probably within the realm of what they have been managing. But if there's a change, sudden or otherwise, in that behavior, it's only a predictor, it's not a diagnosis. But it's the change that may be, what could be again a predictor of a behavior. So each Saturday by itself, looking at it with within that framework is misses perhaps part of the point. It's the continuum through time that may be really a predictor. The other one was anger, by the way.
Yeah.
People exhibiting anger at the floor, getting, is also one of the best predictors that somebody may be experiencing something.
That's a hard one to get a handle on systemically.
That's right.
Because that's episodic. But I take it by change, you mean either showing up more days than Saturday.
Precisely.
Staying longer on Saturday.
That's right.
Or markedly increasing the amount you're betting every Saturday.
Right. Right.
Plus,
if you're getting angry.
Yeah, but I'm still trying to think of ways to track Yes, plus if you're getting angry, punching at the machine, that's right. But I'm thinking of ways that one might be able to track changes in behavior on a systemic basis. You could, I take it, tell if the person's showing up every Saturday night. You could also track how much they're spending and how much.
Right. Well, and frankly, this goes back to a couple of the other strategies, or one of the big strategies, which is the education of the employees. You know, this woman also talked about employees cannot be in a position of diagnosing. That usually backfires. They're best equipped if they can make a referral, let's say, to a professional or things like that. So, because it's really, the trend is easier detected by somebody who's there all the time, knows their customers, knows their clients. You know, come back for the next shift and the person is still there. Wait a minute, I saw you here 24 hours ago. There's little systemic that could be, I wonder, implemented and it's often perhaps that more effective with the education and outreach with employees.
Well, Mark, how would this be operationalized? Okay, so if we adopted this model, would it be that anybody who was on a player card system who gambled once a week or more, we would direct the licensee to send to all such people certain kind of information through some delivery mechanism?
I don't think I would recommend that. No, I think
So how would this be operationalized?
Well, I think that if you take a look below, an example of sort of the more personalized information would be either play management features or play information features. That those would be features that would be made available on a voluntary basis to all players, but those types of features provide the level of detailed feedback to the patron, a higher intensity of information than for example, a brochure that would be available on the gaming floor.
I didn't get that. So how do you identify intensive gamblers? In the real world operationally, how do you identify them, A, and B, what is the licensee obligated to do to them?
Okay, so to me, the licensee would be obligated to make information that would be available to all patrons. A range of different types of information would be available. That type of information could be as simple as the brochures, which are kind of a standard course of practice right now, to more intensive types of information and tools that would provide a level of feedback and engagement to the patrons. And those types of tools are captured in 2.2, the play information and management systems. Again, it becomes that would be the ideal way. I think another way would be to take a look at what is the utilization of the Responsible Gaming Information Center. The Responsible Gaming Information Center would have staff during peak hours. It could provide more interactive type of information that you could get from the Responsible Gaming Information Center that perhaps you can get it there, but even if you're not engaged with the play management and information features.
But those are population-based systems. Those are systems those are information tools which would be available to everybody, and you're kind of hoping that the more intense gambler is going to use the more intense information. So, but the arrow here says that when you get to intensive, there's a personalized delivery system. And I think this is different from the play management. You're talking about a separate issue, which is informed decision-making. And what would be the personalized delivery mechanism to intensive gamblers?
Well, okay, so I think that play management features are personalized. Personalized meaning it gives you precise feedback about your exact gambling behavior. And probably with that, then recommendations on
Okay, so
decreasing your
but
risk.
the play management system is an optional, is an opt-in system.
Correct.
We're talking about a voluntary system, so whether you're an intensive gambler or not, it's not the licensee's duty under a play management system to identify intensive gamblers. It is the individual's option to opt in. So that's not what I understood you to be saying in strategy 1. It says that if you're an intensive gambler, the licensee shall, forget exactly what it says.
And the licensee shall make available. I would say that you want to employ a lot of different strategies. The type of feedback that you could receive from the play management features, the play information features, the brochures and that you would receive that would be available throughout the casino, as well as the Responsible Gaming Information Center.
Okay.
I would say that you want to make sure that there's many points at which this type of information is available that the patron could interact with.
Okay, so you're not suggesting under 2.1 that the licensee identify intensive gamblers and do something to them. You're saying under 2.1, you're saying that there ought to be a range of tools available. They're available to everybody. And some of them, if you get you down to 2.2, which is if you opt into a system, if you say to the licensee, I want to be told, a variety of things, then that would happen. But there's no affirmative duty under 2.1 for the licensee to identify intensive gamblers and to deliver anything to them. So I understand what you're saying.
That's correct.
Okay.
Which is where I was reading that to be.
That-
See, that's not clear here.
I didn't-
Okay.
On my read.
That's not at all.
That's why I'm pursuing it, because I
Right.
think
No, that's a big deal.
when you actually turn this into an operational set of actions,
Mm-hmm.
it becomes less onerous than it appears.
Well,
to be.
this is the one that I was referring to earlier, that where it says licensees have a responsibility. I think that the commission has a responsibility here too. It's really wordsmithing, and you brought up the larger issue, Mr. Chairman. But
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to quibble over terms, but I think that's unclear, and I think it's really important. And if that's how this is supposed to work, then I'm fully comfortable with it.
Okay.
Yeah, me as well.
You're more comfortable when it's information that's available through multiple strategies to patrons, as
Well, I'm more
opposed to.
comfortable. Yeah, I'm more comfortable with that loose, what I think is a loose definition of intensive gambler, calls for more personalized information. If that comes in the context of that voluntary play information and management system that the patron has enrolled in, I think that's a person who is, I'm perfectly comfortable with it then.
Okay. All right. We had spoken about that yesterday as a possible area where we would need to wordsmith, and it's clearly coming out today. So.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's helpful.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Okay. Well, then that does actually lead well into the section 2.2, play information and management systems. And this is the issue that probably created the greatest, I didn't say controversy, but.
Say controversy.
Can I say controversy? Right.
Mr. DeSalvio is smiling. I'd say controversy.
Mr. DeSalvio could speak to this, I'm sure.
Right.
And so what we had originally called pre-commitment, we are calling the play information and management systems. So the points that I would really want to make this is that it is voluntary. If a patron wants to, with their player card, enroll in play information and management systems, they are able to do so. That we would make.
Can I just speak to this, Mark? Because
Yes, sir.
I think this was a source of major misunderstanding. In Mark's original draft, there was a proposal that player cards be mandatory, that everybody have to use player cards. He has subsequently dropped that. He also said there should be a voluntary, at that point he was referring to voluntary pre-commitment plan. But the many readers thought that the two fit together. There should be, everybody has to use a player card, and everybody has to participate in a pre-commitment plan. That was not what was proposed. The pre-commitment, now the player management system, has always been proposed as a voluntary system. But some of the people came loaded for bear at our last partnership meeting to attack a mandatory system, and there was never a mandatory system in mind. It was confused because of the player card system. So as slowly people began to understand what Mark was actually proposing, a little bit of, at least some of the antipathy ebbed.
Okay, so what's the objection to this now? Is it technological cost?
There's a feasibility or and cost-effective argument here relative to when it comes down to implementing, depending on whatever is going to be implemented.
Right.
Do you want to elaborate?
Yeah,
I could.
As I first understood the issue, it was an issue of efficacy, how effective is pre-commitment tools to help people manage their gambling behavior, and another was technological. What are saying that it wasn't feasible to implement these on the gaming devices,
Right.
or questioning whether it was possible. And so I engaged in some pretty extensive research to try to explore what types of evidence it does exist in this area, as well as speak with a number of different companies that would provide this type of service of what is the technological barriers and solutions to it. In a nutshell, I think that in terms of the efficacy, what is the evidence of efficacy? I would say that generally it's ambiguous and somewhat mixed overall. I would say that in the last couple of years, that as technology has advanced, as acceptance of the practice has advanced, that there is the general movement is towards that there is evidence of efficacy of these types of tools. That said, I think that if this is chosen as something that we would like to implement, that we would pay very close attention to it, because it has not been implemented in the United States. And the way the devil's in the details. How do we implement it? How do we promote it? And what is the utilization? What is the uptake? All of these things are incredibly important questions that we would want to try to answer to decide whether we ditch it, modify it, or move it forward. I think that that I also want to point out that there are questions about what is the cost of implementing this, and that is a very difficult question to answer. I think that it's ideal if you implement it up front, because you're not replacing machines and you're building it from the ground up, and you're not tossing anything else out. But in terms of what is the actual cost of this, I think there are many variables, which is a great reason why it would be excellent to explore this with one of our operators and get very specific information about that, about what are the cost barriers, or what are the solutions to any of the other barriers that would be in the way.
So to be clear, you're not proposing at the moment that we adopt this. This is still being studied by the partnership, where you're looking into both the costs and, such as they are, the knowable benefits.
My recommendation is that there is, in my mind, ample evidence that would say that if we really want to provide a range of responsible gaming tools, that these should be on the menu. I think that there is an extra layer of due diligence to make sure, and perhaps this is through our relationships with our operators, to really iron out some of the details of that. I would really like to make sure that this is done right, and to make sure that there aren't any fatal barriers that would be standing in the way. And I think that there's ways that we can accomplish that.
To iron out the details of the efficacy or the feasibility?
All of it. First, the feasibility, ironing out the details of the feasibility. If we iron out those details of the feasibility, you move on to ironing out the details of the efficacy once you implement that. I'd say that as the body of evidence exists right now, there is enough evidence to say that it's feasible and it's worth moving forward with, but that we want to pay close attention to that.
Did you mention it was being used in Australia?
Correct.
And we're talking specifically slot machines?
Correct.
We should be able to find out what it costs there to use, right?
Yeah, yes, I think that it's a good starting point, and it could give you a general idea, but we're talking about implementing it in the U.S. We're talking about implementing it in a new gaming establishment, and I think, and the number of machines, the existing technology, what technology our operators are wanting or intending to employ is important. I think that there are a number of different variables that while we can get a general sense perhaps of what the cost is from other jurisdictions, I want to know what it is here.
I had a suggestion that and this is wordsmithing, but it gets to the heart of what we're talking about, which is prior to where it says play management tools, we insert in some form or fashion effective or feasible. In recognition that, we might not want to be 100% foolproof necessarily, but we're not starting with everything necessarily.
Well, that brings me to a theme. I mean, that raises for me a thematic question. This is designed to be an overarching set of principles, not regulations, right? In other words, everything that's in here, and we'll come back to that in some specific instances later on, everything that's in here is going to be effected through the promulgation of regulations, right?
Yes. Not everything, but much.
Well, this,
Would be, yes.
2.2, all right, let's
Correct.
stick with this. 2.2, the philosophy would be self-executing. That's what the document is about. But 2.2 would be effected through promulgation of regulations.
Correct.
And it is in the context of promulgating the regulations that we'd have to have much more granular detail as to what it is we're going to require and what outcomes those requirements are going to produce, right? And we couldn't do that until we have done a feasibility study in terms of what the machines will be capable of doing, and a cost study, and then we'll get specific comments from people during the regulation promulgation process that will educate us not only on the proposals that we've made, but the problems that those proposals may create. So we adopt this as a philosophy, and then we look to the regulatory mechanism to help us with the detail, right?
That makes sense to me, yes.
And is it in that context that we could again return to the idea of setting up efficacy studies and thinking about, with the help of our able researchers from wherever they come from, and we've got a stable of very able researchers working for us, including yourself, setting up some kind of an efficacy study so that we don't just roll this out as a general measure without studying its efficacy, and in the process, perhaps bringing some industry people who are now doubters along.
Okay, I like that idea. That's great.
Maybe not bring them along, but maybe.
I mean, that would be consistent. We did say at the partnership that this was still an open issue, that we were, there was going to be another meeting, Mark, where other information was going to be brought back. But we were in an awkward situation because John and Mark talked to machine providers who said, this is no problem, we can do it easily, it's being done all around the world, and made it sound, the machine providers made it sound as if the cost and the efficacy and the technology was a non-issue. The industry said, we're not going to rely on their word, they're just salesmen, we're not going to put a whole bunch of new stuff into our systems without having it really be debugged, and so we had two totally different characterizations of the technology, and we had no independent ability really to judge it. So we said we need to dig into that one a little bit more. On the efficacy side, I agree with Mark's characterization that such evidence as there is in a voluntary system suggests that it's probably a pretty good idea for some probably quite small percentage of the people. So we were also going to get whatever final data we could get on what the take-up is in the voluntary systems. So eventually, we would be able to compare a true analysis of cost to a relatively true analysis of efficacy, and then be able to make an informed decision about how it works. Meanwhile, we're also talking about, as I said, MGM came up and offered the possibility of talking about doing some kind of a test or a model or a study. And we've also approached Penn to talk about it as well. But I think to be fair to the industry, I don't think I don't think we're going to vote today anyway. I think we've made that clear. But we told the industry this was still an open question, and we would look into it a little further before even you would come to your final conclusion.
Right.
Well, it's not, it sounds to me like we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
I just really would like to look at some data, and it seems to me this is an area where we could actually get data and have a good, solid, as you say, measure of cost and benefit.
Right. Okay. Yeah, in terms of cost, yes, I want to see what the possibilities are of establishing that cost. What would be the cost in Massachusetts as opposed to looking only in other jurisdictions. So,
right.
Okay.
Right. And we may need to get some operators and some machine makers in the same room so we can reconcile their conflicting claims.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. Well, that was the stickiest one.
No, it's really interesting. To the extent this soft stuff can be data-driven with hard data, it's really intriguing to figure out how to do it.
Yes.
So,
I find it, I agree. This piece specifically is fascinating. When you start to scratch the surface of it, it seems to make perfect sense to you, to me, to others. I think that when you dig a little bit deeper, you start to understand some of the complexities of it and some of the barriers that exist. But I think that in essence, in the level of research that's been done, warrants much further, more serious investigation of what is the feasibility.
right.
In terms of a responsible gaming initiative, I don't think that we can just easily take that off because of the barriers that are known at this point.
Right.
Okay. Moving on to 2.3, the Responsible Gaming Information Center. So this is one of the issues that has been kind of out there for a long time of how within the statute it requires that there be space set aside by the operators for I think mental health and counseling services. What we am envisioning and what I'm proposing would be that space be a responsible gaming information center, and that space certainly have the capacity to deal with such sensitive issues as patrons in distress and who are needing some type of brief information and referral to help, including enrolling them in the self-exclusion program. I think that there is a much greater utility for this space as a responsible gaming information center that would have a draw of a much greater number of patrons coming in. And as Penn has proposed in their blueprints, and I support, that you don't put it off in the corner where you can ensure that type of confidentiality. You put it up front and center for patrons coming by, and within that space, you make a smaller space available to manage the more confidential or sensitive information. I think that the Responsible Gaming Information Center, if we look to a model that has been implemented in British Columbia, where they offer a range of different tools to promote responsible gaming and do it in a way that is non-threatening, is inviting, and engages the customers with the confidence that the person knows what they're talking about. I think that this has such a fantastic potential in Massachusetts.
Makes a lot of sense.
Okay. And this is another one of the issues that came back before the Mass Partnership for Responsible Gaming, and I think that that we move towards a general consensus that this makes sense, that this is something that we can all wrap our heads around in a plan. Okay, moving on to self-exclusion. So self-exclusion is actually a regulation that we already have, and what I'm calling also throwing into self-exclusion the ability to opt out of marketing lists, the ability to be banned from receiving house credit and or check cashing privileges, as well as the regulation that we have in place to be banned from the property altogether, and that would obviously then include they would not receive marketing materials and obviously not credit or check cashing services.
I'm trying to remember, Mark, did we, how did we handle the racing side? I know we talked about it. Did we finalize that?
Yes, we did.
So it's all one facility, and so you would not be able to?
You would not be allowed to, there's a designated area for the racing facility, and it's within the gaming area of a gaming establishment for the property-wide.
Okay, it's property-wide, okay.
Yes.
That's what, okay.
So it's within the gaming area of the gaming establishment that they would be barred from.
Got it.
Okay. And also recommended within this is a slight twist that I just wanted to point out, which is it's an engaged approach, that while self-exclusion traditionally is a very administrative task, the engaged approach would take greater steps, additional steps to try to refer somebody to get additional help. Not mandatory, but taking additional steps to try to make that referral to get help.
Great. Let me interrupt, Mark, before you go to 3. It's now 1 o'clock. We had hoped that we would be done by 1. We were going to take an hour break, then come back and do Region A at 2. Do you want to plow ahead and get this done, and then take our, is that,
No, we're,
you all right with that?
we're what, at least halfway through?
Yeah. Okay, go ahead. So we'll have a late lunch.
As Mr. Day pointed out, that they're in terms of the original feedback on the self-exclusion from the original framework and the process that we went through, there seems to be general agreement that this is fine to move forward.
Right.
Strategy 3 is providing protections within the physical environment, and within this I have 7 different recommendations for you. Some of these are also kind of outlined within the statute. Restricting access to gambling by underage persons, monitoring the premises for unattended children, disallowing tobacco use in gaming establishments, several measures in order to minimize alcohol abuse, assisting customers in need or tending to customers in need, encouraging breaks in play, and finally, we put into here the third-party exclusions.
Mark,
What? Oh, go ahead.
I had a couple of questions on these strategies, only because with all the touring that we've done with respect to strategy number 1, we've seen different levels of how licensees in other jurisdictions go about number 1. I mean, they have almost a cattle chute where you got to go by somebody in security to, you know, as I saw recently, you know, you just kind of walk onto the gaming floor and hopefully somebody comes around in a jacket. Hello. Somebody comes around in a jacket and catches you, so to speak. But you know, both methods of operation we've seen. Is there a preference from your standpoint on what works better?
Right. I would say that I don't have enough information about how people would be entering the gaming area in order to say what would be best. I think that a lot of it depends on the actual design of the facility, and I want to allow the flexibility that there may be a lot of different designs for the facilities, but that given that there should be solid policies and procedures in place. That if it isn't people coming in through central areas and being monitored that way, that there are other options, as you mentioned.
Okay. On 3.3, why include it? They're not allowed to smoke inside the facilities at all anyways. I just don't know whether we can take that out or not.
We certainly could. I wanted, it's a restriction within the physical environment, and it seemed to fit well. Within efforts that we've undertaken or that statute is requiring us to do, and so I put it in there for that reason.
There's a bunch of other statutory requirements that are in here.
In 3.4, you know, is we've gone around and had host community hearings, surrounding community hearings, you know, residents are typically concerned about, you know, the level of alcohol service, you know, and that translating into somebody, you know, getting on the road. But I didn't know if this could be a place where to kind of strengthen a level of credibility that we know our licensees will have around appropriate and restricted, you know, service of alcohol, that we could reference a program that's widely accepted, something like a Serve Safe Alcohol. I mean, instead of, say there will be training, you know, that certainly puts our licensees at somewhat of a risk, but if we could reference, I'm not an expert on this, but, you know, reference a program that, you know, everybody seems to adopt as having the best credentials or the best standards for that type of training, might give some assurances that we are protecting people from being overserved. And then,
so just so I'm clear, it would be to identify a specific training that would be adopted, and opposed to just identifying training generally within it.
Or are you saying recommend it, require a specific one, or at least set a standard saying such as Serve Safe or comparable?
I mean, this is probably more in Commissioner Cameron's bailiwick, but, you know, setting a standard for the training as opposed to, yes, we'll train our employees to make sure that people aren't being overserved. You know, matching it up with either the standards or identifying a program specifically. I don't know if it.
Well, isn't that more of a tactic, you know, rather than a strategy? I mean, that's just one example, for example, right, of something that could be done.
Well, you're just trying to modify training to make it clear that we're talking high quality and proven effective.
That's fine.
It could also be, as we did under training and corporate social responsibility, where we state that an MGC identified or approved training that would allow us to do more investigation on that issue.
That's right.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Others?
Yeah, I had a question about why we're prohibiting all alcohol between 2 and 8.
That's within statute.
Yeah.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
That's a good reason.
Yeah.
Place is open, but you can't get a drink.
And then finally, in 3.6, this is probably really just wordsmithing. Licensees shall implement practices to ensure that all customers are discouraged from participating. I'm not sure you can ensure that anybody is discouraged from anything, but you can discourage people.
Yeah. So
Implement
perhaps
practice to discourage patrons from.
Okay.
Right.
How do you do this? I didn't understand this one exactly. What does this mean? What,
Well, to me, it means that you have other options besides gaming or gambling. That there's hospitality, there's restaurants, there's other non-gaming options for people to engage in.
well, that's going to happen. That's a given. There's going to be all those other things. But this says the licensees shall implement practices. What is a practice that would do this?
I think that, again, it's probably a wordsmithing that it should be offer.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
Non-gaming amenities that would give other options besides.
Seems to
besides
me that
gambling.
the Penn National Gaming Floor that we just looked at has a lot of those things on it. right now.
And I think that's
Right.
great, yes.
Right.
Okay.
Well, and just, this is also an operational thing. If an amenity is to have food available, but they close all restaurants between 11 and 6, let's say, then during that period of time, there's not that availability. So there's an operational question too.
Yeah,
Right.
True.
right.
Okay, well, I think the wording,
Yeah.
it's more than wordsmithing. I thought this was an affirmative duty on the part of the licensees to deliver something, and that sounds like not the case.
Okay, I can change that.
Okay. And then in the third-party exclusions, what we're saying here is, as a matter of public policy, we believe that there should be some kind of a third-party exclusion plan, details to follow.
Correct. The third-party exclusion is also outlined in statute. The details of what that looks like and who's responsible
do it,
for
yeah.
overseeing that is, I think, we need to determine.
Right. Okay. Number 4.
Number 4, ensuring responsible marketing.
Okay, I had a question, I had 2 questions on the same theme. First sentence, licensees are to develop and implement strategies to ensure advertising and promotions are delivered in a responsible manner to ensure contemporary standards are reflected. A. And then down in 4.1, second bullet, reflect generally accepted contemporary standards of good taste. What do those 2 mean? And how do you... First of all, are there any contemporary standards of good taste? And secondly, how do you know it? Is it one of those things you know when you see it, and then how do you, what are the kind of contemporary standards are we talking about in the first phrase of the first paragraph? The bottom line is, it just strikes me that those are way too vague to be enforceable.
Okay.
Or to provide acceptable guidance to the licensee or anybody else.
I
Right.
mean, if there is, maybe there is, the advertising industry maybe has some kind of accepted standards. If you put in something like that gives people some clarity, that's one thing.
Somebody didn't like what we just said.
Yeah.
Right.
Or did so in bad taste.
But I agree, I
Yeah.
agree with the points. Unless there is an actual standard, like an advertising industry, a standard or something, I agree that it's not helpful.
So the rationale behind this is we basically adopted the American Gaming Association's code of conduct and the guidance they provided for advertising and marketing. And I felt that generally what they did was solid, and they covered the main points. I concur that specific piece of it is relatively vague. But
This comes right from there,
correct.
so that 5-line sentence is there, so.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That
Well, it
first
sounds great, but it doesn't mean anything.
the sentences start, the first sentence in the paragraph comes from them? Is that the one you're
No, the
referring?
5-line sentence,
The 5-line sentence, which one is that?
right at the beginning. Licensees are,
That's what I was asking. So that
No.
comes from AGA?
No, not
that.
the beginning, but the standards that are outlined below in 4.1 and 4.2.
Right, it's not the text
oh, it's
up
not
above.
the,
No.
okay.
Mark, I had a question, excuse me, were there other, Commissioner Stebbins, were you about to say something?
I have a question a little further down in 4.2, which also sounds a little bit fuzzy or tough to enforce, but the be placed before any audience where most of the audience is ordinarily expected to be below the legal age to participate in gambling activity. I mean, if I'm doing television advertisement, I'm assuming I got to run my ads at night because most of the kids will be in bed. I'm not sure what that.
You know, the way that I would interpret this is, for example, of advertising at college sporting events, that it would be discouraged that you to place advertising in
Somewhere
venues.
where you have a better idea of what the audience is.
It could also, I mean, I would even say within television that you have target audience. You know who's watching what programs and what the general demographic is, and that you would pay attention to where those media ads are placed.
Okay.
Other questions? I had one, Mark. Advertising efforts do not target vulnerable groups such as minorities, the elderly, and the poor. Poor, maybe, it's something to think about, but I don't think we want to say you can't advertise to minorities or you can't advertise to the elderly.
Right. I think that needs either revised or removed, as we talked about.
And I think vulnerable groups probably says enough.
I think so too. Yeah.
And I had a similar concern about the first part of the first bullet under 4.2. Marketing will not contain images of celebrity entertainers, I guess. It's a hard sentence to parse, but...
Well, it would not contain images that would appeal specifically to children or minors, or celebrity or entertainer endorsements, again, to appeal specifically to children or
Well,
minors.
there's an and/or there. If it's all designed to keep stuff away from children, then that sentence ought to be clarified, and I'm happy with it, but...
Appeal.
Okay.
I don't know what's unclear about that, but if you do, Mark, that's fine.
Well, I do.
I know. What's unclear about it?
I thought that the images and entertainer endorsements it shouldn't contain those.
Yeah, I read it that way as well.
Oh, any.
Any.
Right.
All right,
Any.
fine, okay.
Any advertising should.
Yeah.
I didn't get the restriction simply to children, so.
Okay.
From a practical standpoint, with respect to that bullet, we're talking about our licensees having facilities that are accessible by families, the Oyster Bar, what have you. I mean, how do you begin to boil that down to their advertising? They can't advertise a restaurant where...
No, it's casino gambling specifically that's restricted, not the facility, for example.
Correct.
You could advertise the whole facility to everybody, but the gambling activity.
It's casino gambling advertising. And in fact, it's a change from the first version where I did not provide that type of specificity, and we added that in there.
Okay. Thanks.
Now, let me raise one other point about this, because this gets back to the question I asked earlier about the notion that this does not become effective until regulations are promulgated. It's a philosophy, it's our guiding set of principles, and the like. 4.2 and 4.1 look like regulations. They're much more specific than things that we have done elsewhere. They're not statements of philosophy. There's particular requirements and prohibitions. So my question is, and I return to that question, is all of this to become effective only as mandatory as opposed to philosophical, only when we pass regulations embodying?
So, in the way I interpret this is that it serves two really. One is it guides the development of regulation. Where necessary, we would promulgate regulation that would come from this. But where we don't, it would also guide their general practice in policy and practices in regards to responsible gaming.
Okay, so I have a problem, I have a question and a concern, I guess, I never have any problems, with having that second understanding lead to some kind of action against a licensee for failing to comply with one of these bullets when the content hasn't gone through the regulation promulgation process. I think we're on very shaky ground in attempting to do that. And there are a number of things throughout this set of practices that have the appearance of specific commands and prohibitions. And so that's why I asked what the intent was, because I think we're in a difficult position if we don't go through that process. It's just something to think about, something to consult with counsel about, and make sure we've dotted our i's and crossed our t's as we go forward.
Okay.
Director Day?
Chairman Crosby and Commissioner McHugh, I think from my perspective, and as Mark was talking, is as you talk about the concept that we seem to share of a great deal of this, is that there's philosophy statements that will help guide the development of regulations that then will incorporate whatever process we need to make sure they're fully informed. So I think that's one of the the main ideas behind these standards. But I think when Mark, at least in my impression, when he talks about the other points offer guidance, to me, I kind of see that once the commission adopts this document as a guiding principle, then the ones that don't go forward in regulations also serve as a guidance of best practice might be a little up, but I mean good practice in responsible gaming, but not anything that the commission could take any kind of formal enforcement action. It would be merely something that advises licensees that these are good ideas, but not intended, would not be used to enforce anything.
And I fully agree with that approach, and think in both respects it's useful, just so we understand what we're doing here, and our licensees understand what we're doing here.
Okay. Anything else on 4? Number 5.
Strategy 5, limit high-risk financial transactions. And that includes house credit, bank card transactions, and check cashing.
The house credit one has changed quite a bit.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, actually, that is worth highlighting. The original recommendations for house credit were quite different, and it received a lot of feedback from different stakeholders. We took that issue specifically first. That was the first issue that we discussed at the Mass Partnership on Responsible Gaming. I think it was very good to understand what is the utility of house credit for gambling purposes. But it was also important then to have a discussion with that group about what types of safeguards can we put into a regulation if we if we revise this.
What kind of what can we
What
put?
kind of, not regulations, what type of conditions or measures can we put into place that would provide protections for vulnerable populations? And I think that I would say that this was a very good example of where we were able to land that seemed to satisfy the stakeholders as well as seems to meet the needs of a responsible gaming framework.
What is, this is much different than the original one, and I understand the differences. What is the increasing, the second bullet from the bottom? Increases in credit will be restricted by frequency and amount. What's the more you ask for, the more frequently you ask for an increase in the limit, the more scrutiny you'll get, or the more?
It would be restricted. And so the purpose, the background would be to stop people from chasing losses. What do you do to stop people from chasing losses? And so the utility of increases in credit will be restricted by frequency and amount would be that you can't keep going back and asking for more and more credit in a very short duration of time. We would limit the frequency by which you could do that, as well as the amount probably being a percentage of what your total credit, the total credit received initially.
Yeah, okay.
This,
Got it, I understand, I got it.
to me, this one has the same problem that some of the other ones did, which is there may be people who are perfectly, there's nothing wrong at all with them going back and getting more and more credit frequently. I mean, if they've got the money and they want to keep gambling, that's their business. So in other places, you've limited it to qualified people. You've taken out, you've made the distinction between people for whom high-risk financial transactions are entirely appropriate versus those for whom it's not or may not be. But this one doesn't make that distinction. So I don't know whether, except for qualified people or something, I don't know, it just.
But would that, even for qualified people, wouldn't the loss chasing problem merit something along these lines? You go in, you get $1 million worth of credit, and you can afford it, and you're checked out. And you come back at the end of the day, and you want to increase your credit limit to $2 million. And you're worth $2 million. I mean, you can afford $2 million. Is that a sign that you're chasing losses in a way that should be discouraged? I don't know the answer to that question.
It boils down to what is that frequency and what is that,
If
if you're seeking, no.
Well, be careful.
No, if you're seeking credit extensions, multiple credit extensions in one day, that's clearly, a warning sign. But if your credit extension requests is over a much larger period of time,
And
it's a very different situation.
Yeah, and that may be where the regulations have to be fine-tuned to
That's right.
implement this process.
Right, and I felt like that was an issue that needed to be fine-tuned and worked out through the regulatory process, but that in concept, it's an important measure to have in place.
Right.
I don't know, this doesn't seem to bother anybody else. The word limit high-risk financial transactions, I think you and I might have talked about this, but it's more like manage or control or something.
Minimize.
Well, it's not quite. It's not that we don't like high-risk financial transactions. We just don't like high-risk financial transactions for people who shouldn't be having them. So, I don't know. If that doesn't bother anybody else, forget about it.
It was a term that was a struggle, I have to say. Manage high-risk financial transactions would be another one, but it's what could we say that would capture the essence of the measures or the strategies that are being recommended?
Yeah. That's the best I can come up with, manage or control. I think the way you've revised it is good. I'm very comfortable with what we're actually proposing be done. But whatever, it's up to you. Number 6.
Engaging the community. There are a number of different steps, and I have to say, I think that there are a number of different steps that I'm recommending that the operators take in order to engage with the community. And Commissioner McHugh, I think that this may be a good example of where these are solid recommendations for responsible gaming practices that encourages an interaction and engagement with the community, but that it would be difficult, very difficult to move many of these into regulation. These I consulted with the Mass Council on Compulsive Gambling to get their feedback as well.
So how do you, Commissioner McHugh, how would you, are you saying that we should put some under regs, but
No.
not all? Or should we put these under regs too? Or we're just making clear that we can't take punitive action against anybody for anything unless it's in regs? Is that the way to put it?
Yes.
So we wouldn't necessarily try to put these into regs because they
Right.
really don't fit.
Right,
Okay.
they don't fit in regs. But just so that everybody's clear that this is a statement of policy and expectation. It's not a set of regulatory rules that
Yeah.
you'll be penalized for failing to follow.
Okay.
Yeah, you can't violate a strategy.
Right.
Okay.
You can't be penalized for violating this.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Hey, Mark, in this section, you reference two stakeholders. You have responsible gaming stakeholders. I assume I know who those folks are, but you have just a broad definition of stakeholders. Who do you envision being in that kind of broad group of stakeholders?
Okay, could you...
6.4.
6.4, provide opportunities for stakeholders to voice relevant concerns and questions. Licensees shall integrate the results of stakeholder engagement into their strategic decision-making. I think that it is very broadly defined of who the stakeholders would be, and it should be very broad. I would say that it may be on the business side. What are the competing businesses within the community that are stakeholders that have concerns or ways in which they would propose to partner? It could be human service agencies that have a particular want to voice a particular concern or suggestion with the operators.
Okay.
I think that to me it's more than engagement is important. That sort of tactile engagement that you would have with the community beyond revenues that extend into the communities.
You know, coming back to this, you can't punish people. You can't punish people. You can't take action against people, but you certainly can require periodic reports to the commission on how things are going with respect to the components of this framework that are not embodied in regulations, and invite a licensee to come and talk to the commission in a public session if there were questions about the content of the report. That being the case, things like 6.4 ought to give some guidance as to, and this goes back to the other ones that we talked about that seem to be vague, some guidance as to what we're after here so that the licensees would have fair notice as to what we were expecting to come out of this. So in that vein, I would join the question about that and encourage an effort to see whether that one can be made more clear.
Okay. Can I provide an example of this from my experience working in the state of Iowa of a good example, and I think it's relevant because the general manager from the casino in Sioux City, Iowa, is actually now the general manager at the Penn facility, and that they did it.
He's right there.
Lance George.
He's still here.
Did a
careful
great
what
job
you say.
of engaging with the community and finding different opportunities, not just the treatment providers with the problem gambling treatment providers within that community, but other ways as well. That I think that being good corporate citizens, being good citizens and engaged with the community is key. that part of their role is to be a part of the communities which they function, and that extends far beyond the gaming services that they're providing. And I think Lance George and the work that he did at the Iowa facility is a good example. I think that by and large, we have applicants that talk about community engagement, and I would really like to see that come to fruition.
I don't disagree with strong support the idea. It's just and maybe it's the word stakeholders. Maybe stakeholders is what's throwing me off here, because I don't understand necessarily who they are. And maybe there's a term that's more self-identifying, or it's just use members of the community to show that we're looking for creative outreach.
Well, I would suggest that I can take that back to the Mass Council as well as to DPH and consult with them further about alternative ways to phrase that.
Did the Sioux City facility, was there a written thing? Was there anything that said, so here's our community relations strategy?
You know, I think, and Lance could probably speak better to this, but I think that it varied from facility. My experience is it varied from facility to facility, and it was based in large part on the leadership at those gaming establishments in terms of how engaged they were. And I heard examples of fantastic engagement as such. I've also heard examples of relative isolation and disengagement. And I think that we have a great opportunity to really foster that up front.
Right. And the broader the engagement, the better. And that's
yeah.
And I agree with you. It's going to be like, going through the steps on, on diversity. If great leadership is going to insist on doing this stuff. It's not rocket science. You know how to engage a community. It's easy. But you don't do it if you don't have leadership at the top to make it happen. Is anything else on strategy 6?
I just had one other quick question, not meaning to prolong our conversation on these beyond, but it's been pointed out, these are great frameworks to drive the regulatory process. The regulatory process where the rubber meets the road, licensee, it'll probably include penalties for, catching somebody underage on the floor. At what point, let's say somebody is consistently getting pinged for, underage person on the floor. At what point do you see yourself, or you see yourself being helpful and constructive to going back to that applicant or licensing and saying, you've gotten dinged 12 times in the last 12 months, how can we work together to create, look at your strategies and try to take some corrective action, as opposed to just having them get dinged with the fine every time it happens?
Yeah, I really look forward to getting to the point where we're at that point of our regulatory process where we can provide guidance to our operators, provide technical assistance, and beginning to identify what are other operations doing that is effective, and trying to tailor those regulations and uniformly using them in other operations.
Anything on appendices? We talked about Appendix A quite a bit.
Appendix B, unless there's something on Appendix A, Appendix B is really intended to provide direction to where responsible gaming materials are displayed and provided.
Or Appendix C?
I did have a question on Appendix C. I think we talked about this prior to this, Mark, but the second bullet is perhaps what Commissioner Stebbins was also talking about. Do we mean here gambling activities as opposed to casino advertising?
Yeah, I think that we need to clarify that.
you know, I mentioned to you before the one about 25 years or older, and that seems so arbitrary to me, you know. But what you want is, you want people who are of age.
Yeah, you could actually strike that last sentence, but the first sentence would be
Right.
more general and hold the truth of the
Right.
spirit of what we're trying to
Right.
accomplish.
Right, I agree with that. Okay, anything else on the problem gambling framework? Nice.
A lot of
This is
work,
really
Mark.
good.
Thank you.
Very, very good.
Really,
Thank you.
very well
Yeah,
done.
thank you, yeah, good.
You have one other quick item, and then we'll eat a lunch.
Right. So the other item is the contract that we hold with Problem Gambling Solutions. I am recommending or proposing to the commission that we approve an increase to that contract. It currently stands at $22,000. I have placed into the budget for my division to an increase in that from $22,000 to $55,000, keeping the scope and the term of the contract the same. And the rationale for that, actually, if I could back up, the scope of the contract actually has remained unchanged, but the task at hand is quite extensive. And I think that if I had understood exactly how extensive this project would be up front, it never would have been initiated at a level of $10,000. I would have scoped it out slightly different to understand what the intensity or the level of effort that would be required. But that is hindsight. But given this project, the importance of it, the time intensity to even just get to this point, it has required a lot of assistance from Dr. Jeff Murata and Problem Gambling Solutions. So to continue that work and to bring this to a document that I hope that we can vote on at some point to your satisfaction, I would like to increase the contract for Dr. Murata and Problem Gambling Solutions.
Is that amount designed to take you all the way to the end?
Correct, yes.
All right, do we need a vote? I guess we do.
I can make a motion. I'd move that this commission authorize staff to increase the contract with Problem Gambling Solutions to the amount stated in the packet of $55,000.
Second? Second. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. We will adjourn. Commissioner McHugh, what time do you want to reconvene? It's a quarter.
About, 30 minutes. Would that work? There's lunch there.
Oh, there's lunch here?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I think
So 2:15?
somebody made a run to the store, so yeah, 2:15.
2:15?
Would that work? That's what everybody?
All right, we are adjourned until 2:15.